Welcome. You have arrived at a place where time slows to a gentle crawl, where the heavy burdens of the modern world simply cannot follow. Here, beneath the sprawling canopy of an ancient jungle, safety surrounds you like a warm, familiar blanket. Close your eyes and allow the tension to melt from your shoulders, your jaw, your brow. Take a slow, deep breath in, letting the cool, fragrant air fill your lungs, and release it with a quiet sigh. We are traveling back, far back to the year 750, into the vibrant heart of the Maya world. You are standing at the threshold of a secluded, sunlit courtyard, nestled within a grand limestone city. The afternoon air is thick and sweet, carrying the faint, earthy aroma of crushed bark and blooming orchids. There is no rush here. The sun casts long golden shadows across the smooth stucco floor, moving with deliberate grace as the day begins its long surrender to dusk. You can hear the distant rhythmic tap of a wooden mallet, a steady heartbeat echoing through the quiet plazas. This is the sacred space of the papermakers, where the inner bark of the wild fig tree is transformed into something eternal. As you step forward, the noise of your own life fades into a distant whisper, replaced by the profound, comforting stillness of history. Settle in, release your thoughts, and let the ancient tranquility of this slow Maya afternoon wash over you completely right now. As you settle deeper into this peaceful haven, surrounded by the delicate scent of river water and the soft rustle of broad green leaves, consider making this tranquil sanctuary a permanent part of your evening routine. If these quiet journeys into the forgotten corners of the past bring rest to your weary mind, perhaps you might gently tap the subscribe button below. Think of it as leaving a small, polished jade bead at the entrance of our shared courtyard, a quiet promise to return whenever the modern world becomes too loud, too bright, or too fast. By joining our gentle community, you ensure that there will always be a shaded corner, a meticulously woven hammock, and a timeless story waiting patiently for your arrival. Your support allows us to continue unearthing these deeply soothing moments hidden within the vast tapestry of human history, crafting them into soft, hypnotic lullabies just for you. There is absolutely no pressure, only an open, enduring invitation to wander with us again. For now, simply let your shoulders drop a fraction of an inch further. Let the rhythmic, soothing beat of the wooden mallet guide your breathing. Inhale the sweet humidity of the jungle air, and exhale any lingering traces of the day you have just survived. You're entirely safe here, sheltered within the deep, cooling shadows of this magnificent limestone city. Rest your eyes, trust in the steady flow of time, and prepare to step further into the beautiful, endless, deeply comforting calm. The transition into the interior of this architectural sanctuary is marked by the immense, quiet presence of towering limestone walls. These are not merely stones stacked upon one another, they are massive blocks quarried from the earth. They have been shaped, refined, and smoothed by generations of patient hands wielding rudimentary but perfectly precise tools of hard chert and brittle, razor-sharp obsidian. The artisans worked tirelessly until the exterior surfaces achieved a pristine, velvety smoothness that defies the rugged nature of the stone. If you were to press the flat palm of your hand against the pale surface, you would feel the residual coolness of the morning mist trapped far within the porous, microscopic labyrinth of the rock. This coolness provides a stark, deeply grounding contrast to the ambient, sweet warmth of the surrounding tropical jungle air. The limestone here is never just a flat, uniform grey. Rather, it acts as a complex, shifting canvas, a tapestry of creamy, milky whites, soft, earthy ochres, and faint, dusty roses that seem to subtly change their rich hues with every passing cloud that drifts lazily across the distant burning sun. Deep within the tiny crevices where these massive, perfectly fitted blocks meet, time and nature have collaborated in silence to create tiny, intricate, thriving micro-ecosystems. Delicate, fragile emerald mosses cling stubbornly to the ancient mortar. They are softer to the touch than the finest woven cotton garments, thriving peacefully in the microscopic reservoirs of pristine moisture left behind by the heavy morning dew. If you were to lean your face in very close, breathing in slowly, you would catch the faint green aroma of this moss, a scent so pure, damp, and clean that it effortlessly washes away any lingering thoughts of the chaotic modern world outside these walls. The walls themselves slope ever so gently, almost imperceptibly inward, as they rise toward the open, vast sky. It is a subtle, masterful architectural embrace that makes the immense vastness of the open courtyard feel incredibly intimate, cradled and entirely secure against the endless expanse of the jungle. Beneath your resting feet stretches a continuous floor of heavily polished stucco, a marvel of ancient engineering and unhurried care. The surface material has been deliberately burned, crushed into a fine dust, mixed with the sweet sap of local trees, and smoothed over and over again with river stones until it gleams with a soft, muted matte luster. This gentle sheen is deeply reminiscent of the surface of a tranquil, undisturbed cenote lake just before the subtle break of dawn, when the water is perfectly still. The floor is remarkably flawlessly level, specifically designed to catch the angled golden rays of the late afternoon sun and reflect them softly upward in a warm, diffused, ambient glow. This upward reflection illuminates the entire courtyard from below, washing out any harsh, unforgiving shadows and bathing the entire enclosed space in an ethereal, golden luminescence. Walking across this ancient, polished floor is a profoundly silent affair. The dense material eagerly absorbs the sound of your soft footsteps, magically transforming everyday movement into a graceful, frictionless, and completely silent glide. Here and there, the pale, flawless surface of the stucco is gently interrupted by the slow, mesmerizing drift of fallen leaves, brought in by a gentle, heavily perfumed breeze that meanders slowly through the open corridors. These leaves, broad, thick, waxy, and beautifully painted by the changing seasons in fading shades of chartreuse, pale yellow, and deep muddy olive, scrape ever so softly against the polished stone. They produce a sound akin to the delicate, careful turning of a heavy, ancient, and highly revered Amate paper page. The floor itself miraculously retains a perfect, unchanging equilibrium of temperature. It neither steals the precious warmth from your resting body, nor radiates any excess heat. Instead, it acts as a permanent, grounding foundation that firmly anchors your physical presence in this singular, endlessly peaceful, and incredibly quiet moment in time. Far above the towering limestone walls, the vast expanse of the bright tropical sky is naturally framed by the sprawling, awe-inspiring canopy of a magnificent centuries-old ceiba tree. Its massive, heavily buttressed roots are hidden safely somewhere beyond the courtyard's immediate confines, reaching deep into the dark, fertile earth, but its sprawling branches extend outward like benevolent, protective arms over the open, sunlit space. The countless leaves of the sacred ceiba are a vibrant, glowing, translucent green, and they act together as a living, breathing filter for the heavy tropical sunlight. As the slow afternoon progresses, the sun begins its inevitable, gradual descent toward the distant horizon, and the brilliant light that finally reaches the courtyard floor is no longer direct or blindingly bright. Instead, it is broken, shattered into thousands of individual, shimmering, distinct beams that pierce the thick green canopy like physical threads of pure spun gold. Where these distinct angled beams intersect with the humid jungle air, they suddenly illuminate billions of tiny, floating dust motes and microscopic flecks of yellow flower pollen. This creates a slow-motion, completely silent blizzard of glittering, floating gold. This beautifully illuminated dust dances in a chaotic, yet deeply hypnotic ballet, rising and falling gently on invisible thermal currents. They drift with a languid, lazy grace that instantly commands your absolute undivided and deeply relaxed attention. You could easily sit and watch a single glowing mote for hours on end, tracking its lazy, looping trajectory as it glides smoothly through a bright shaft of light, disappears completely into the deep shadow of a broad leaf, and emerges once again, glowing with a quiet inner brilliance. The very quality of this afternoon light feels entirely liquid, pouring smoothly and slowly over the ancient stone and polished stucco, softening every sharp edge, gently blurring every hard corner, and painting the entire, secluded world in the drowsy, nostalgic tones of a beautifully fading dream. In a quiet corner of the courtyard where the indigo shade is absolute deepest, a perfectly round, incredibly shallow basin rests peacefully. It has been painstakingly carved from a single block of dark volcanic basalt. This heavy basin holds a small, precious pool of perfectly clear collected rainwater. The water within is completely, absolutely still, acting as a dark, flawless, liquid mirror that perfectly reflects the underside of the sprawling ceiba canopy and the slow-moving, fluffy white clouds drifting through the blue sky high above. Everything about this small corner is devoted entirely to stillness, save for one tiny, endlessly repeating, mesmerizing detail high above the basalt basin, hidden somewhere within the dense tangle of green leaves and thick vines. A single drop of condensation is slowly, patiently gathering. It swells with agonizing, beautiful slowness, growing heavier and heavier as it collects the ambient moisture of the thick, sweet air. Finally, when it becomes entirely too heavy to hold on to the tip of its leaf, it plummets downward in a perfectly straight, invisible line. The exact moment it strikes the glass-like surface of the dark basalt pool, a soft, incredibly clear musical plink echoes gently through the utterly quiet courtyard. This sound is immediately followed by perfectly symmetrical concentric ripples that travel slowly outward, gently distorting the clear reflected image of the sky for just a few fleeting magical seconds. Gradually, ever so slowly, the tiny waves settle. The motion ceases and the water seamlessly returns to its glassy, undisturbed, immaculate perfection. This tiny, repeating micro-event, the slow gathering of the drop, the long fall, the musical sound, the spreading ripples, becomes the entire focus of your small universe. It is an infinitely repeating, soothing cycle of gentle tension and beautiful release that lulls your conscious, waking mind into a state of profound yielding and total surrender to the wonderfully sleepy rhythm of the ancient Maya world. Moving slowly away from the open, brilliantly illuminated center of the sunlit courtyard, your relaxed gaze is naturally drawn toward the deep, incredibly inviting shade of an expansive, sheltered portico that runs seamlessly along the entire eastern perimeter of the complex. The heavy, sloping roof of this shaded structure is supported by a perfectly straight row of magnificent, unyielding wooden pillars, painstakingly crafted from the incredibly dense, ancient heartwood of the revered sapodilla tree. This particular wood is truly legendary throughout the vast Maya world, carefully chosen by master builders not merely for its immense, unbending structural strength, but for its profound, almost magical resilience against the creeping, inevitable passage of time and the relentless, heavy humidity of the surrounding jungle environment. If you were to walk close to the edge of the shade and run your fingertips incredibly slowly down the vertical length of one of these dark, towering pillars, you would instantly feel the breathtaking density of the tight grain. It absolutely does not feel like ordinary lightweight wood. Instead, it feels remarkably like heavily polished stone, a silent, enduring testament to the many decades it spent growing slowly, imperceptibly, within the dense, fiercely competitive canopy of the wild, untouched forest. The surface of the sapodilla is perfectly smooth to the touch, yet it remains profoundly textured by the deliberate, rhythmic tool marks left behind by a deeply focused master carver countless centuries ago. Your sensitive fingertips would easily trace the faint, undulating ridges and beautifully shallow valleys of these ancient, purposeful strokes, a tactile language speaking volumes of immense patience and unwavering dedication to the craft. The rich color of the wood is a deep, intoxicating shade of dark, bitter chocolate, beautifully mottled with subtle, natural streaks of burnished copper and deep, bruised plum. As the ambient, radiating warmth of the slow afternoon gently bakes the ancient wood, it releases a faint, incredibly soothing aroma into the profoundly still air. It is a dry, slightly spicy, comforting scent deeply reminiscent of aged cinnamon bark, dried vanilla orchids, and the faintest, lingering, earthy echo of sweet, cured tobacco leaves. This natural, woody perfume mingles effortlessly with the deep, earthy humidity of the open courtyard, creating a rich, deeply complex fragrance that wraps gently around your awakened senses. It naturally encourages your own breathing to slow down even further, perfectly matching the lethargic, unhurried, and deeply relaxed pace of the beautifully fading afternoon. Suspended carefully between these monumental dark wooden pillars are large, incredibly heavy panels of masterfully hand-woven cotton textiles, deliberately placed to act as both intimate privacy screens and gentle softening filters for the harsh tropical sun. These magnificent textiles are not simply flat, lifeless sheets of thin fabric. They are heavy, luxurious, profoundly thick tapestries, born directly from endless months of meticulous, meditative, and beautifully repetitive labor upon a traditional wooden backstrap loom. To closely examine the surface of this hanging fabric is to peacefully witness a vast, breathtaking ocean of micro-detail. The countless individual threads spun entirely by hand from the softest, purest wild cotton gathered meticulously from the nearby sun-drenched fields have been packed together with astonishing, unyielding tightness and absolute precision. You can easily see the tiny, endlessly repeating over and under pattern of the masterful weave, acting as a soothing visual mantra of horizontal and vertical lines crossing constantly in perfect, unyielding harmony. The spun cotton threads themselves are thick and delightfully, perfectly irregular, proudly bearing the unmistakable, charming inconsistencies of human hands. A slightly thicker, softer knot here, a microscopic, delicate thinning there, which gives the massive fabric a rich, organic, and deeply comforting tactile texture. The entire length of the heavy fabric has been dyed using completely natural earthen pigments, carefully extracted and boiled down from the surrounding vibrant landscape. The dominant grounding color is a soft, deeply washed, beautiful indigo, a specific shade of blue so profound, deep, and calming that it perfectly mirrors the very deepest, quietest, most peaceful parts of the twilight sky just before the very first faint stars begin to confidently appear. Woven directly into this calming, vast sea of deep indigo are delicate, perfectly geometric borders dyed in the soft, dusty, muted pinks of crushed cochineal insects and the warm, earthy, muted yellows of boiled wild marigold petals. As the warm, heavy, invisible air currents of the peaceful courtyard drift lazily and slowly through the shaded portico, these massive, heavy textile panels begin to naturally move. They absolutely do not flap or snap violently in the wind. Rather, they billow outward with a profound, majestic, and completely silent slowness. They seem to inhale the gentle breeze, expanding slowly outward into the sunlit courtyard exactly like the rising chest of a deeply sleeping giant, and then, as the invisible, soft breath of wind naturally subsides, they slowly exhale, sinking softly and beautifully back down into a perfect, heavy, vertical plumb line. At the very bottom hem of these panels, thick, twisted fringes of undyed white cotton brush ever so softly against the polished floor, creating a mesmerizing, slow-motion sweep that continually cleanses the ancient stone. The gentle, endlessly rhythmic billowing of these heavy indigo panels creates a mesmerizing, hypnotic, and deeply relaxing play of light and deep shadow directly on the polished stucco floor of the portico. When the gentle breeze smoothly pushes the heavy fabric outward, a thick, warm wedge of golden, diffused afternoon sunlight gently spills across the cold stone, instantly illuminating the tiny, glittering, microscopic particles of crushed white limestone deeply embedded within the smooth floor. Then, as the heavy dyed fabric slowly and inevitably swings back to its resting place, a long wave of deep, cooling, beautifully blue-tinted shadow washes completely over the exact same space, gently erasing the bright light with the absolute softness of a slowly closing heavy eyelid. This slow, beautifully oscillating rhythm, warm light, cool shadow, warm light, cool shadow, acts exactly as a giant, visual pendulum, swinging back and forth with a steady, utterly reliable, and incredibly peaceful cadence that effortlessly commands your own heavy eyelids to droop lower and lower with every passing cycle. The accompanying sound of the massive textiles moving is equally deeply enchanting. As the heavy, deeply textured cotton gently and slowly brushes against the smooth, unyielding, polished surface of the sapodilla wood pillars, it produces a sound that is barely audible to the human ear, yet incredibly profound and deeply soothing to the resting mind. It is an incredibly soft, deeply muffled, sweeping sound, exactly like a perfectly dry palm frond being dragged very slowly and very carefully across a vast bed of incredibly fine, powdery white sand. It is a delicate whisper of natural friction, a hushed, ancient secret shared intimately between the soft woven fabric and the hard, aged wood, a sound so entirely delicate and fleeting that you must completely hold your breath and focus entirely on the present, quiet moment to truly appreciate its subtle beauty. Beneath the heavy, protective canopy of this wooden portico, thoroughly sheltered by the thick thatched roof above and the heavy woven panels around you, the ambient temperature drops noticeably and wonderfully. The trapped air here is instantly cooler, significantly thicker, and profoundly, deeply restful. It represents a completely distinct magical microclimate, a carefully shaded, deeply intentional sanctuary specifically designed for quiet, internal reflection, slow, deliberate, unhurried tasks, and the blissful, total surrender to a long, undisturbed, and profoundly restorative afternoon rest. The stark, beautiful contrast between the radiant, sun-baked center of the open courtyard and this cool, deeply indigo-tinted haven makes the thick shade feel exactly like a physical, deeply comforting and entirely safe embrace. Hanging quietly from an incredibly thick, intricately hand-braided rope of rough agave fiber in the very deepest, darkest corner of the portico, entirely undisturbed by the relentless passage of time or the bustling world outside, is a delicate, beautifully cascading, handmade wind chime. This particular chime is completely, utterly unlike the loud, metallic, ringing objects of the noisy modern world. Instead, it has been painstakingly, lovingly constructed from dozens of small, deliberately, irregularly shaped pieces of hand-fired terracotta clay and incredibly smooth, pearlescent, polished shells gathered carefully from the distant, whispering, sandy shores of the warm Caribbean Sea. Each individual, unique piece has been carefully and meticulously drilled by hand using a tiny bone awl and beautifully suspended on its very own thin, incredibly strong, deeply twisted thread of pure spun wild cotton. The hanging pieces of baked clay are deeply, wonderfully textured, proudly bearing the literal, fossilized fingerprints of the dedicated artisan who carefully molded them by the riverbank. Their surfaces boast a warm, rustic, deeply earthy terracotta color that gracefully contrasts with the pristine, milky white and beautifully soft pink, catching iridescence of the rounded seashells. Because the hanging pieces of earth and sea are relatively thick and heavy, it takes a significantly strong, beautifully sustained breath of cool wind to set them into gentle musical motion. For incredibly long, stretching, silent minutes, the beautiful chime hangs in perfect, absolute and unbroken stillness, resembling a deeply silent, beautiful sculpture of earth and ocean, miraculously suspended in the heavy, humid jungle air. But occasionally a slightly stronger, deeply refreshing, cooler breeze magically manages to weave its unseen way through the heavy indigo curtains and brush gently against the hanging cotton strands. When this magical event happens, the heavy pieces of clay and smooth shell slowly, gently, and beautifully collide with one another in the shaded air. The resulting echoing sound is nothing short of magical. It is absolutely not a sharp, piercing, or jarring ring, but rather a wonderfully hollow, deeply resonant, entirely organic, and beautifully soothing clinking noise. It sounds exactly like incredibly smooth river pebbles tumbling gently and slowly over each other in the shallow bed of a slow-moving, deeply peaceful forest river. The hollow clay predictably yields a low, deeply muted, earthy thud, while the smooth shells gracefully offer a slightly higher, beautiful, melodic, clicking clack. Together they create a beautifully random, entirely unscripted, and incredibly ancient lullaby composed entirely of earthly tones. The beautiful sound rises gently for just a fleeting moment, lingering softly and beautifully in the perfectly quiet air of the shaded portico, and then slowly, inevitably fades away into absolute, profound silence once more. This beautiful fading leaves the ancient courtyard feeling even more still, even more incredibly peaceful, and even more deeply, wonderfully asleep than it was before the gentle breeze ever arrived. Moving still deeper into the profoundly quiet recess of the sheltered portico, your tired eyes slowly adjust to the deep, cooling indigo shadows, eventually revealing the breathtaking expanse of the solid limestone back wall. This ancient surface is completely unlike the smooth, completely unadorned blocks of the outer courtyard walls. Instead, it is a magnificent, sprawling canvas of incredibly intricate, masterfully executed bas-relief carving. The entire surface has been painstakingly sculpted to tell a deeply ancient, entirely silent story of the peaceful earth and the slow, deeply rhythmic cycles of the natural Maya world. The incredibly skilled artisans who worked this stone countless generations ago completely avoided any harsh, jarring angles or sharp, aggressive lines. Instead, every single figure, every ornate woven headdress, and every beautifully rounded hieroglyphic glyph has been rendered in wonderfully soft, undulating, biological curves. The carved stone shapes look remarkably like the heavy, rain-swollen clouds of the wet season, perfectly plump and deeply, beautifully dimensional. If you were to gently extend a relaxed hand and trace the edge of a carved resting jaguar or the curling, heavy petals of a stone water lily, your sensitive fingertips would encounter a surface that is wonderfully cool, ever so slightly powdery, and worn incredibly smooth by centuries of gentle, reverent touches. The ambient, heavily diffused light that miraculously manages to filter through the thick cotton textiles catches the raised, rounded edges of these ancient carvings, creating a breathtakingly complex, deeply hypnotic landscape of tiny, illuminated highlights and profound, velvety microshadows. Exhausted dust motes, completely tired from their long, golden, floating dance in the bright, open courtyard, eventually drift lazily into the shade and settle incredibly softly upon the small, protruding ledges of the stone figures. This continuous, invisible rainfall of dust blankets the ancient history in a microscopic, downy layer of pristine, undisturbed silence. The sheer, overwhelming scale and the immense, quiet beauty of this carved wall demand absolutely nothing from you, gently asking only that you let your heavy gaze wander aimlessly along the flowing, continuous lines, following the deeply soothing, meandering path of the ancient stone carver's patient, beautifully unhurried chisel. Resting peacefully upon the wonderfully polished stucco floor, perfectly centered at the base of this magnificent storytelling wall, sits a heavy, deeply beautiful ceramic brazier. This ancient functional object is an absolute masterpiece of humble, earthly elements, formed entirely from the rich, dark, iron-heavy clay carefully gathered from the soft, yielding banks of a distant, slow-moving jungle river. The heavy vessel takes the deeply comforting shape of a wide, generously fluted chalice, supported by a thick, incredibly sturdy pedestal base that anchors it firmly, unmovably to the ancient earth. The exterior surface of the baked clay has been deeply blackened by countless years of faithful, continuous use, possessing a rich, gorgeous matte finish that seems to eagerly absorb the surrounding indigo shadows into itself. Yet, if you look incredibly closely at the curved surface, you can still perfectly see the faint, beautiful, rhythmic impressions left behind by the patient potter's thumbs. These tiny, perfectly spaced, smooth indentations form a delicate, continuous ring around the thick upper rim, an intimate, fossilized record of a careful human touch that occurred long before you ever arrived in this peaceful place. Inside the wide, gaping bowl of the dark brazier lies a remarkably deep, incredibly soft bed of impossibly fine, pale grey ash. This ancient ash is so delicate, so entirely devoid of mass or physical weight, that it resembles a thick, perfectly even layer of freshly fallen, powdery snow, completely undisturbed and profoundly still. Buried deeply within the exact center of this soft, insulating bed of grey powder rests a single, beautifully glowing ember of incredibly dense, slow-burning ironwood. It absolutely does not blaze or crackle, rather it throbs with an incredibly slow, deeply rhythmic, mesmerizing pulse of dark, molten ruby-red light. It looks exactly like the quiet, resting, eternal heartbeat of the courtyard itself. Directly above this glowing, solitary ember, the trapped air shimmers and gracefully distorts ever so slightly in tiny, invisible waves of gentle, comforting heat, creating a beautiful, mirage-like ripple that softly blurs the intricate stone carvings on the limestone wall directly behind it. Arranged with immense, deliberate, and incredibly loving care on a small, beautifully woven mat of dried palm fibers right beside the warm brazier, is a small, precious collection of raw, completely unrefined copal resin. These irregular, hardened tiers of ancient tree sap look exactly like tiny, asymmetrical pieces of captured, crystallized sunlight resting quietly in the deep, cooling shade. Their natural colors are profoundly beautiful and endlessly varied, ranging from a pale, incredibly milky frosted yellow that resembles a clouded, delicate sliver of the midnight moon, to a deep, rich, translucent amber that glows warmly with the heavy, satisfying color of wild dark honey. If you were to gently pick up one of these irregular, beautiful tears, you would find it surprisingly lightweight and ever so slightly sticky to the warm touch. It is a beautiful, tactile reminder of its incredibly organic, living origins deep within the heavily fragrant heartwood of the sacred bleeding copal tree. Even before it is gently introduced to the quiet, radiating heat of the waiting ember, the raw resin naturally emits a wonderfully faint, incredibly complex and deeply intoxicating aroma. It is a soft, earthy, completely silent whisper of dark green pine needles, crushed, sweet citrus rind, and the deep, rich, comforting scent of damp, heavily fertile jungle soil baking in the sun. When an unseen, caring hand finally slowly places a single golden tear of this precious resin directly onto the glowing ruby-red heart of the ironwood ember, a profound, beautiful, and utterly silent transformation immediately begins. The hard amber edges of the copal tear begin to slowly, beautifully soften and melt downward, instantly turning from a solid, crystallized stone into a dark, bubbling, incredibly fragrant puddle of golden liquid. It absolutely does not burst into sudden flame, but rather surrenders completely and peacefully to the gentle, radiating warmth. This beautiful melting produces a wonderfully soft, barely audible, deeply satisfying sizzle that sounds exactly like a single tiny drop of warm rain landing softly upon a perfectly dry, heavily textured tropical leaf. From this slow, beautifully golden melting process, a single, incredibly thick, luxurious ribbon of deeply fragrant smoke begins its slow, truly hypnotic ascent into the heavy, utterly still air of the shaded portico. The smoke is absolutely not dark, grey, or harsh. Instead, it is a magnificent, pale, milky blue-white, possessing the incredibly soft, ethereal, flowing visual texture of the finest, most delicate spun silk imaginable. Because the trapped air within the deeply shaded recess of the portico is so incredibly still, entirely undisturbed by the gentle sweeping breezes of the open courtyard, the beautiful blue smoke does not scatter, thin out, or instantly dissipate. Instead, it rises in a completely solid, beautifully unbroken, agonizingly slow vertical column, twisting gracefully and elegantly curling upon itself in a mesmerizing, completely silent, and profoundly languid dance. It lazily forms beautiful, temporary floating shapes, perfectly rounded spirals, long, slow loops, and gentle, undulating, soft waves that gracefully fold and beautifully unfold with the completely unhurried, hypnotic grace of a heavy, submerged piece of cloth drifting slowly in a deep, quiet, peaceful underwater current. As this milky ribbon of intensely fragrant smoke slowly rises higher and higher, it gently bathes the intricately carved limestone wall, slowly filling the deep, velvety carved crevices and gently rolling over the plump, rounded stone glyphs. This slow-moving, heavily perfumed veil of smoke creates a stunning, deeply magical optical illusion, making the ancient, stone-carved deities and the sleeping mythological jungle creatures appear as though they are actually breathing, subtly and deeply shifting their heavy stone weight within the cooling shadows. Simultaneously, the incredibly rich, deeply complex, sweet scent of the burning copal slowly, gently expands to fill every single inch of the entire portico. It is an aroma that is both deeply grounding and wonderfully, intensely uplifting, washing over your waking senses with the profoundly comforting, warm scent of ancient, untouched forests, sweet, baking earth, and timeless, completely unhurried peace. This heavy, intoxicating, magical fragrance acts exactly as a final, incredibly gentle weight upon your tired, drooping eyelids, softly encouraging you to completely abandon any lingering, stubborn thoughts of the chaotic outside world. It invites you to simply breathe in the sweet, heavy, resinous air, and to surrender entirely, without any hesitation, to the beautiful, smoky, all-enveloping slumber of the ancient, perfectly forgotten afternoon. following the gently glowing, meandering path of the pale blue copal smoke as it drifts lazily along the base of the intricately carved limestone wall. Your incredibly relaxed gaze naturally falls upon a breathtaking marvel of ancient, deeply thoughtful engineering, running seamlessly along the very edge where the heavy shadow of the portico meets the sunlit expanse of the open courtyard. There is a narrow, beautifully shallow channel carved directly and flawlessly into the dense, polished stucco floor. This is not a simple utilitarian ditch, but rather a remarkably elegant, perfectly level miniature aqueduct, specifically designed to introduce the deeply soothing, purifying element of fresh, living water into the quiet, sacred workspace of the Amate papermakers. The interior walls of this tiny serpentine watercourse have been smoothed over completely, heavily coated with a specialized, deeply water-resistant resin extracted from the native sapodilla tree, rendering the ancient stone entirely frictionless and wonderfully soft to the eye. Sourced silently from a hidden, deeply shaded underground limestone cistern entirely shielded from the warm tropical sun, the water that flows through this beautiful narrow runnel is profoundly, astonishingly clear. It possesses an absolute flawless transparency that borders on the magical, looking exactly like a continuous, incredibly slow-moving ribbon of pure liquid glass. The water does not rush, it does not bubble aggressively, and it absolutely never churns. Instead, it glides forward with an agonizingly beautiful, incredibly majestic slowness, moving at a pace that perfectly mirrors the heavy, lethargic, entirely unhurried passing of the warm afternoon itself. The surface tension of this incredibly pure, silent stream is so perfectly undisturbed that it acts as a tiny, flowing mirror, beautifully capturing the inverted, miniaturized reflections of the towering, dark wooden pillars, the heavy indigo textiles, and the pale, drifting clouds moving slowly across the high, distant sky. To simply watch this tiny, liquid world slowly drifting by is to feel the heavy, persistent thoughts of the modern world being gently, smoothly washed away, carried off piece by piece into the deep, comforting shadows of the ancient past. Resting peacefully at the very bottom of this shallow, winding watercourse, beneath the flawlessly clear, moving surface, lies a meticulous, highly intentional arrangement of incredibly smooth, perfectly rounded river pebbles. These are not random stones, but a carefully curated collection, painstakingly gathered by hand from the shallow, murmuring beds of distant, slow-moving jungle rivers, chosen specifically for their deeply calming hues and flawless, heavily polished textures. There are stones of a deep, muted jade green, possessing the soft, cloudy translucence of a beautifully heavily clouded sky. Stones of a pale, creamy bone white, smooth and round as tiny sleeping bird eggs, and stones of an incredibly rich, dark, earthy ochre, resembling tiny solid drops of hardened ancient tree sap. Because they are completely submerged within the flowing, crystal-clear water, the natural earthly colors of these small resting pebbles are profoundly intensified, glowing continuously with a vibrant inner saturation that makes them look like scattered, precious jewels resting peacefully in a liquid display. Anchored gently to the porous surfaces of these smooth stones, and clinging stubbornly to the very lowest shaded edges of the channel's interior walls, are tiny microscopic forests of delicate, vibrant aquatic moss. The tendrils of this soft, emerald green moss are incredibly fine, softer and far more delicate than the thinnest, most meticulously spun cotton thread, as the invisible, deeply gentle microcurrents of the slow-moving water wash endlessly over them. These tiny, flexible green threads sway and undulate in a mesmerizing, incredibly slow motion, aquatic ballet. They bend and yield completely beautifully to the subtle push of the water, flowing perfectly downstream before slowly, gracefully returning to their original resting positions, only to be gently pushed once again. Watching this endless, infinitely repetitive and beautifully yielding dance of the green moss perfectly synchronizes your own slow, heavy breathing with the eternal, patient rhythm of the flowing water, lulling your deeply relaxed mind further and further into a state of absolute yielding tranquility. The acoustic profile created by this beautiful, slow-moving water feature is an absolute masterpiece of natural, deeply soothing sound design. Because the channel is so flawlessly shallow and the water flows with such incredible, deliberate gentleness, It produces absolutely no harsh splashes or sudden jarring noises. Instead, it generates a continuous, incredibly soft, profoundly murmuring whisper that fills the deeply shaded air of the portico with a blanket of completely perfect organic white noise. If you close your heavy resting eyes and focus your entire attention solely upon this tiny flowing stream, you can hear a beautiful, deeply complex symphony of microscopic sounds. There is the incredibly faint, delicate, glassy rustle of the water slipping smoothly over the rounded curves of the submerged pebbles, the tiny, incredibly soft musical plinks as a solitary, terrant drop of condensation falls gently from the carved limestone wall and miraculously joins the moving stream, and the soft, continuous, deeply satisfying, liquid hum that resonates perfectly through the dense stone floor. This magnificent, gentle sound is not an interruption of the courtyard's profound silence, but rather a deeply beautiful enhancement of it, a natural, soothing lullaby that continuously hums in the quiet background, effortlessly drowning out any remaining stubborn echoes of your waking day. Accompanying this beautiful, liquid sound is a profound, deeply refreshing shift in the immediate atmosphere. The slow, continuous evaporation of the cool, moving water creates a thin, completely invisible layer of chilled, highly conditioned air that rests heavily just a few inches above the floor. As the incredibly slow, meandering afternoon breeze gently pushes this chilled air outward from the watercourse and across the warm stucco, it wraps beautifully around your resting ankles and deeply relaxed legs. It feels exactly like a completely invisible, incredibly soft cooling blanket made of heavy silk, beautifully contrasting with the ambient sweet warmth of the tropical afternoon and creating an environment that is so physically comfortable, so profoundly, perfectly balanced, that your body naturally sinks deeper and deeper into a state of total, heavy, undisturbed rest. Following the gentle downward slope of this beautiful water channel just beyond the thickest, coolest shadows of the portico, the water pools slowly and beautifully into a shallow, perfectly rectangular stone basin. Resting peacefully right beside this dark, tranquil, reflecting basin is a low, impeccably constructed, highly elevated platform masterfully woven entirely from thick, deeply fragrant, golden-hued river reeds, tightly and securely bound together with heavy, deeply textured cords of spun sisal fiber. This beautiful rustic platform proudly serves as the quiet, deeply patient resting place for the absolute core essence of this entire sacred courtyard, the raw, deeply organic materials waiting to be transformed into eternal, recording pages. Stacked with immense, deliberate care upon the woven reeds are heavy, beautifully organized bundles of completely freshly harvested amate bark, carefully gathered from the towering sacred wild fig trees deep within the surrounding untouched jungle. The harsh, deeply textured, dark outer layer of the tree bark has already been painstakingly, completely stripped away by skilled hands, revealing the magnificent, fibrous, profoundly pale inner bark beneath. This raw, unworked material possesses a gorgeous, creamy, incredibly soft off-white color, deeply reminiscent of a pale, heavy winter moon, heavily streaked with tiny, delicate, vertical lines of warm golden brown. These long, thick, ribbon-like strips of pale inner bark are curled ever so slightly inward at their delicate, ragged edges, making them look exactly like heavy, resting ancient scrolls that have quietly fallen into a deep, uninterrupted slumber. They have been tightly bound together into neat, perfectly uniform, cylindrical bundles using incredibly thick, flexible, bright green jungle vines, their heavy, fibrous weight settling beautifully and completely into the soft, yielding texture of the woven reed platform. The very presence of these raw, resting bundles exudes an overwhelming, profound aura of deep, ancient patience. These thick, fibrous strips have spent countless, deeply quiet decades growing slowly, silently, and steadily within the dark, heavily shaded heart of the wild jungle, soaking up the torrential, sweet rains and the fierce golden sunlight. Now entirely removed from the chaotic, sprawling forest, they rest here in absolute, perfect stillness, peacefully waiting for the incredibly slow, methodical, deeply rhythmic process that will eventually transform their raw, earthly fibers into smooth, eternal pages of history. To be completely near these heavy, resting bundles of raw, pale bark is to be enveloped entirely by a fragrance that is so profoundly ancient, so deeply, intimately connected to the wet earth, that it instantly bypasses all conscious thought and speaks directly wonderfully to the most peaceful resting parts of your mind, because the pale inner bark is completely fresh and still deeply saturated with the natural life-giving sap of the giant fig tree. It continuously emits a heavy, deeply complex, beautifully grounding aroma into the cool, still air. It is a wonderfully rich, deeply damp, profoundly organic scent. It perfectly combines the sharp, incredibly clean, bright green fragrance of crushed, tender leaves with the deep, heavy, comforting, and immensely dark smell of freshly turned, highly fertile jungle soil immediately following a long, heavy, satisfying tropical downpour. Woven deeply into this magnificent earthy scent is a very faint, incredibly subtle, completely natural, and beautifully sweet note of slow organic fermentation, a tiny invisible hint of wild tropical yeast gracefully breaking down the tough plant fibers, preparing them perfectly, patiently for the heavy wooden mallets. As the deeply fragrant, pale blue, incredibly milky smoke from the nearby copal brazier drifts slowly, silently across the shaded portico, it gently, beautifully collides with the heavy, damp, organic scent of the resting fig bark. The magical, completely invisible commingling of these two ancient, powerful aromas, the sweet, heavily resinous, warming spice of the burning copal smoke, and the deep, cool, profoundly wet, deeply grounding earthiness of the raw bark, creates an olfactory masterpiece, a totally unique, incredibly hypnotic, and deeply tranquil perfume that exists entirely and exclusively within the thick, heavily protective walls of this ancient hidden courtyard. Breathing in this heavy, deeply scented, magical air is exactly like inhaling the pure, highly concentrated essence of history itself, a deeply slow, highly potent, completely organic elixir that gently, incredibly firmly commands your tired, weary body to finally completely let go, entirely stop resisting, and to completely surrender to the wonderfully heavy, totally inevitable, and deeply beautiful gravity of a truly perfect sleep. Moving just a few incredibly slow, deeply unhurried paces past the woven reed platform, where the raw bark peacefully slumbers, your profoundly relaxed gaze is naturally drawn toward a new, utterly captivating architectural feature. Sunk deeply and perfectly into the incredibly dense, unyielding limestone bedrock of the shaded courtyard floor are three massive, perfectly circular soaking vats. These incredible basins are not merely placed upon the smooth floor, they are an integral, completely seamless part of the living earth itself, painstakingly hollowed out by generations of dedicated artisans using only hard stones and endless, beautifully rhythmic patience. The heavy curved lip of the closest vat rises just a few inches above the polished stucco floor, completely smoothing out any sharp edges or harsh angles into a profoundly gentle, wonderfully rounded rim. If you were to slowly crouch down and rest your heavy, tired palms upon this ancient circular rim, you would instantly feel the breathtaking, deeply grounding chill of the subterranean stone. It is a dense, completely unwavering coolness that effortlessly radiates upward from deep within the damp earth, beautifully neutralizing the lingering sweet warmth of the tropical afternoon air. The surface of this raised stone lip is incredibly, almost impossibly smooth, worn down to a gorgeous, completely frictionless polish by countless decades of soft human hands and resting forearms leaning gently against it day after day, year after long year. The ancient, heavy stone naturally varies in beautiful color, displaying a mesmerizing, cloudy canvas of soft, pale grays, incredibly muted, chalky whites, and the faintest, most delicate veins of a deeply hidden, muted iron red. As the soft, intensely diffused afternoon light miraculously manages to filter through the heavy indigo textiles of the portico, it gently grazes the rounded lip of the stone vat, casting beautifully soft, completely indistinct micro-shadows that gracefully follow the sweeping, endless curve of the ancient heavy basin. Contained securely within the massive, incredibly heavy embrace of this ancient stone vessel is a deep, perfectly still pool of truly magical liquid. This is absolutely not the pristine, flawlessly clear, quickly moving water of the nearby carved channel. Rather, it is a profoundly heavy, beautifully opaque, incredibly dense mixture that looks exactly like a vast deep bowl of spilled liquid moonlight, to prepare the tough, raw fig bark for its final eternal transformation. The incredibly patient artisans have carefully, slowly mixed the cool, resting rainwater with deeply fine, profoundly soft, chalky white ash gathered meticulously from the gently cooled cooking fires. This deliberate ancient alchemy has completely transformed the clear water into a thick, milky, profoundly pearlescent solution that gently, softly coats the inside of the stone vat. The surface of this heavy alkaline water is completely, absolutely unbroken, forming a massive, incredibly thick flat mirror that beautifully, softly reflects the dark, heavy wooden ceiling of the portico above. Because the liquid is so incredibly dense, so profoundly laden with the dissolved silky ash, it completely refuses to ripple or eagerly vibrate in response to the tiny microscopic tremors of the surrounding earth. It is an image of absolute, totally unwavering stillness, a liquid manifestation of a deeply peaceful, dreamless sleep. The color of the still surface is breathtaking, a profoundly soft, completely matte, incredibly creamy white, heavily suffused with the faintest, most delicate, almost invisible undertones of a cool, powdery blue, exactly like the very center of a rare, perfect pearl resting quietly in the deep shade. To simply stare endlessly into this thick, milky, beautifully motionless void is to feel your own heavily burdened mind completely slowing down, perfectly matching the deep, incredible liquid density of the resting water, gently pulling your heavy thoughts downward into a state of total, blissful nothingness. Resting gently and perfectly across the incredibly thick, chalky rim of the massive circular vat is a singular, beautifully carved wooden stirring pan. This ancient, highly vital tool is an absolute masterpiece of functional, beautifully rhythmic design, painstakingly carved from a single, massive piece of heavily aged, deeply dense mahogany wood. The long, incredibly straight, perfectly cylindrical handle of the heavy paddle has been worn down to a state of absolute, breathtaking smoothness by decades of slow, deeply repetitive, heavily methodical use. If you were to slowly, gently wrap your own resting fingers around the shaft of this ancient tool, you would instantly feel perfectly, flawlessly formed indentations exactly where countless, deeply skilled thumbs and heavy palms have repeatedly rested over the centuries. It is as if the hard, dense wood has beautifully, gracefully surrendered completely to the gentle, unyielding pressure of human touch, slowly molding itself perfectly to the shape of a resting, relaxed hand. The wood grain on the long handle is deeply mesmerizing, perfectly displaying tightly packed, beautifully undulating lines of rich, dark amber and profoundly deep, warm auburn that genuinely seem to slowly ripple and flow exactly like a frozen wooden river. Down at the very working end of the long handle, the wood gracefully flares out into a broad, completely flat, wonderfully teardrop-shaped blade. This heavy, wide blade is beautifully, thickly coated in a fine, completely dry, powdery layer of stark white ash, a totally silent, permanent testament to its endless, completely peaceful days spent slowly, rhythmically churning the heavy, milky water below. The beautiful contrast between the rich, dark, heavily polished mahogany of the handle and the soft, chalky, stark white residue on the wide blade creates a deeply pleasing, incredibly grounding visual harmony. Just looking completely at this heavy, resting wooden tool, utterly motionless in the quiet, fading afternoon light, immediately conjures a profound, deeply vivid mental image of slow, rhythmic, deeply sweeping circles, a totally hypnotic, completely endless motion that gently, softly rocks your deeply tired mind to sleep. Submerged completely within this thick, deeply tranquil, heavily milky liquid, resting perfectly and entirely undisturbed, far below the opaque, pearlescent surface, are several heavy, tightly bound bundles of the pale amate bark. Although you cannot actively see them completely through the incredibly dense, white, ashy water, you can absolutely feel their heavy, silent, perfectly resting presence at the very bottom of the ancient stone vat. They are completely immersed in a deeply profound, incredibly slow, totally transformative slumber. The heavy, highly alkaline ash water is quietly, invisibly and incredibly slowly working its ancient magic, gently breaking down the stubborn, tough plant fibers, dissolving the deeply sticky natural sap, and beautifully softening the raw earth completely into a soft, highly pliable, wonderfully delicate material. As this incredibly slow, totally silent botanical breakdown occurs deep within the heavy liquid, a truly magnificent, deeply tiny micro-event occasionally happens on the incredibly still, unbroken surface of the milky water. Deep below, trapped tightly within the thick, fibrous layers of the heavily soaking bark, a single microscopic bubble of deeply ancient air is finally beautifully released. This tiny, invisible sphere of air begins an agonizingly slow, completely silent, heavily resisted journey upward, gently pushing completely through the thick, incredibly dense, milky liquid. It takes immensely long, stretching, silent minutes for the tiny bubble to finally reach the totally flat surface. When it miraculously arrives, it absolutely does not instantly pop or violently burst. Instead, it slowly, beautifully pushes the incredibly thick, pearlescent surface tension upward, gently forming a perfect, tiny, beautiful, milky dome that proudly rests entirely upon the flat water. The tiny dome remains beautifully intact for several long, deeply suspended heartbeats, catching a single tiny golden reflection of the dying afternoon light. Finally, with a sound that is completely, astonishingly soft, a profoundly delicate, incredibly tiny, liquid thwip that is practically invisible to the waking ear, the tiny dome gently collapses softly back into the heavy water. This incredibly small, deeply soft sound is immediately followed by one single, profoundly slow, beautifully thick, perfectly circular ripple that totally lazily travels outward, completely crossing the entire massive surface of the vat before beautifully, silently disappearing perfectly against the ancient stone edge. This beautiful, incredibly slow, intensely repetitive cycle of the rising bubble, the tiny milky dome, the invisible sound, and the final fading ripple is a profound, entirely natural metronome. It continuously, perfectly dictates the heavy, utterly sleepy, completely unhurried rhythm of the courtyard, gently guiding you absolutely, totally, and completely down into the deep, welcoming, and beautifully undisturbed depths of a totally perfect, incredibly restorative sleep. Moving gracefully away from the deep, tranquil silence of the milky, soaking vats, your incredibly relaxed gaze slowly travels along the heavily shaded, wonderfully cool interior wall of the portico. It follows the incredibly intricate, beautifully undulating lines of the carved limestone until it finally finds a deeply worn, incredibly sturdy workbench resting entirely in the deep indigo shadows. This ancient functional altar of vibrant color is constructed entirely from a massive, singular, breathtakingly heavy slab of dense, unyielding volcanic basalt rock. This heavy stone was carefully brought down from the high, distant, profoundly silent volcanic mountains many long generations ago, carried with immense, unhurried reverence. The heavily dark stone table is supported flawlessly by 4 thick, perfectly cylindrical legs of carved pale limestone. These ancient legs hold the dark basalt at the exact, perfect height for a quietly seated artisan to work with absolute, totally uninterrupted comfort for hours on end. Resting perfectly in the very center of this heavy, completely immovable basalt table is the metate, a traditional, deeply concave grinding stone that serves as the true, steady beating heart of the pigment maker's quiet, heavily aromatic world. The metate itself is incredibly ancient, its original, highly rough, naturally porous volcanic texture having been patiently smoothed down over countless uncounted decades into a breathtakingly gorgeous, deeply polished curve. It looks exactly like a heavy, dark, beautifully yielding smile carved directly into the completely unyielding dark grey stone. If you were to slowly run your highly sensitive, completely relaxed fingertips across the deep, swooping basin of the metate, you would feel a surface that is absolutely miraculously devoid of any sharp friction. It is a perfectly smooth, heavily indented, profoundly cool valley, created entirely by the endless, heavily patient, totally repetitive, deeply sweeping friction of solid stone against solid stone. Resting quietly and perfectly within this deeply polished valley is the mano, the heavy, perfectly cylindrical handstone used specifically for the slow, methodical crushing. It is perfectly, flawlessly tailored to beautifully fit the natural shape of two resting, completely relaxed human hands. Its dense, heavy weight is profoundly grounding, practically demanding a slow, sweeping, deeply deliberate, totally unhurried motion that perfectly mirrors the heavy lethargy of the afternoon. Beside this beautiful, ancient grinding altar sits a small, flawlessly woven basket, crafted gently and patiently from the softest, most pliable, naturally dried sweetgrass gathered from the incredibly quiet edges of the distant river. The tightly woven basket itself is a deeply mesmerizing object, its complex, heavily overlapping strands forming a continuous, perfectly rhythmic pattern that acts as a soothing visual mantra for your tired eyes. This beautiful woven vessel securely holds a magnificent, deeply textured treasure of raw, completely unrefined, deeply organic color, a quiet, resting pile of heavily dried achiote pods. These organic, beautifully strange little seed pods look entirely like tiny, softly spiky, incredibly delicate wooden hearts that have been completely baked by the relentless tropical sun into a deep, highly textured, beautifully muted mahogany brown. As they dry completely in the deeply still, warmly heavy air of the courtyard, the brittle, beautifully textured outer shells gracefully split open along a perfect, naturally formed central seam. This gentle splitting reveals the highly concentrated, completely stunning visual secret hidden deep within. Nestled perfectly inside the softly fuzzy, wonderfully pale, heavily protective interior of each spiky pod is a tight, incredibly dense cluster of tiny, deeply angular, incredibly hard seeds. These tiny seeds possess a color so profoundly rich, so incredibly vibrant, that it almost seems to emit its own warm, completely silent, heavily glowing inner light. It is a deep, deeply saturated, intensely fiery brick red, heavily laced with profound, beautiful golden-orange undertones. It is deeply reminiscent of the exact, completely fleeting hue of the heavy jungle sun, just seconds before it completely silently disappears below the heavy, deeply green horizon line. If you were to gently pick up a single dried achiote pod and softly, slowly roll it between your deeply resting thumb and forefinger, the tiny, angular seeds would produce a wonderfully faint, incredibly dry, profoundly satisfying, completely papery rustle. It is a tiny, whispering, incredibly delicate sound that beautifully echoes the completely dry, heavily rustling leaves scattered gently across the distant courtyard floor, lulling your mind further into peace. When the unseen, deeply patient, beautifully unhurried artisan slowly begins their highly methodical, incredibly repetitive work, they gently, carefully coax a small handful of these brilliant, deeply red seeds from their heavily protective pods. They pour them gently into the deeply polished, dark, welcoming valley of the waiting matete. The artisan's invisible hands reach out and slowly, firmly, deeply grasp the heavy, completely smooth, cylindrical handstone. What follows is a profoundly mesmerizing, incredibly slow motion, heavily hypnotic ballet of heavy, beautifully rhythmic, completely downward pressure. The heavy dark stone is pushed slowly, incredibly deliberately forward against the dark basin, gently crushing the incredibly brittle, resting red seeds, and then slowly, effortlessly, beautifully pulled back, push, and totally smooth pull, push, and perfectly heavily pull. This deeply ancient, incredibly hypnotic physical motion produces a sound that is an absolute, unparalleled masterpiece of low, heavily grounding, completely earthy acoustic vibration. It is a deep, highly resonant, profoundly gravelly scrape, sounding exactly like the heavy, incredibly slow, intensely peaceful sound of massive, deeply buried, distant tectonic plates shifting imperceptibly far beneath the ancient resting jungle floor. It absolutely never rushes. The slow, heavy rhythm is completely, perfectly locked into a heavy, incredibly steady, totally unwavering, profoundly ancient heartbeat. It is a deeply soothing, heavily monotonous, incredibly rhythmic lullaby of completely natural friction. It acts as a continuous, perfectly reliable, totally heavy acoustic anchor that gently, slowly, incredibly firmly pulls your weary, tired mind entirely away from any lingering, chaotic, restless thoughts. and entirely completely absorbs your absolute undivided attention into the heavy stone. With every single incredibly slow, deeply sweeping push of the heavy handstone, the tiny, deeply red seeds are beautifully, systematically, totally broken down. They gently, peacefully surrender their perfectly hard, sharp, angular shapes to the immense, patient, heavily grounding weight of the grinding stone, completely dissolving entirely into a profound, highly fine, completely soft, incredibly pigmented dust. As this incredibly slow, totally hypnotic, heavily repetitive grinding process continues endlessly in the cooling, heavily shaded, perfectly still air, a beautiful, profoundly invisible cloud of completely microscopic, intensely colorful dust begins to slowly, gracefully, beautifully rise from the deep, dark basin of the metate. Because the thick, heavy air within the sheltered portico is so incredibly still, completely protected from the wandering breezes of the open courtyard, this intensely vibrant, heavily brick-red dust absolutely does not scatter, dissipate, or eagerly blow away. Instead, it hangs heavily, beautifully suspended just a few tiny, completely static inches directly above the dark volcanic stone. This floating powder catches the incredibly faint, beautifully diffused, heavily angled rays of golden afternoon light that miraculously manage to filter delicately through the heavy, swaying indigo textiles. This totally silent interaction of heavy light and floating pigment creates a tiny, intensely localized, profoundly glowing nebula of deep crimson and deeply fiery, heavily muted orange. It is a perfectly silent, heavy, suspended, slowly turning cloud of pure, beautifully crushed, entirely organic earth. Accompanying this stunning, heavily suspended, intensely visual magic is the slow, beautiful release of a deeply complex, incredibly unique, completely grounding, heavily ancient fragrance. As the tiny, dense red seeds are slowly, perfectly crushed into total oblivion, their deeply hidden, heavily locked essential oils are gently, beautifully released into the profoundly still, cooling air. It is a heavy scent that is profoundly, deeply dusty, incredibly dry, and intensely heavily earthy. It is completely unlike the sweet, heavy, wet moisture of the pale, soaking bark or the warm, incredibly resinous spice of the gently burning copal ember. It smells exactly like deeply baked, totally pure red clay, incredibly old, sun-warmed, heavily porous terracotta, deeply mixed with a very faint, profoundly subtle, perfectly organic, deeply hidden sweetness. It is heavily reminiscent of deeply dried, heavily aged, incredibly dark wild honey, and completely crushed, deeply dried, heavily crumbling autumn leaves baking slowly in the total afternoon silence. This incredibly dry, profoundly earthy, intensely heavy aroma perfectly and totally fills your resting lungs with every single heavily drawn breath. It gently, beautifully, entirely pulls the incredibly heavy, completely slow, deeply comforting, totally silent essence of the surrounding earth directly into your own deeply resting, heavily breathing body. You listen carefully to the heavy, incredibly slow, deeply scraping, perfectly regular heartbeat of the ancient stone on stone, and you completely, totally, deeply inhale the profoundly dry, heavily ancient, beautifully warm scent of the crushed seeds. The incredibly fine, deeply red powder slowly, gently settles over everything, softly blanketing the heavy wooden tools, the dark stone, and the deeply resting, totally unhurried world in a soft, incredibly fine, intensely velvety layer of totally silent color. Every single one of your fully awakened, entirely relaxed senses is completely, perfectly wrapped in a heavy, incredibly thick, beautifully soothing blanket of pure, perfectly unhurried, totally repetitive, deeply peaceful, utterly transformative sensory experience. The heavy, unyielding cadence of the stone grinding against the deeply worn basin gently encourages your mind to completely sever any remaining ties to the waking hours, pulling you seamlessly toward a deeply restorative rest. Nestled perfectly within the deeply quiet, wonderfully shadowed curvature of a shallow ceramic bowl, a small, meticulously gathered mound of freshly unearthed wild orchid roots rests in absolute undisturbed silence. These deeply precious, incredibly vital botanical treasures have been gently, painstakingly coaxed from the heavy, damp soil of the deep jungle floor, harvested specifically for their deeply hidden, intensely sticky, perfectly clear mucilage. To simply look closely at the outer surface of these resting bulbs is to observe a masterpiece of natural, highly resilient architecture. They possess a profoundly irregular, beautifully organic, heavily teardrop-shaped geometry, plump and deeply swollen with the retained life-giving moisture of the long wet season. The outer skin of each heavy bulb is completely coated in a highly delicate, wonderfully powdery layer of completely dry, pale grey earth, a soft, silent remnant of their hidden subterranean existence. Beneath this delicate dusting of ancient soil, the skin itself reveals a completely muted, wonderfully soft, incredibly pale yellow hue, deeply reminiscent of a slowly fading, incredibly soft morning star. If you were to slowly, gently trace the very tip of your deeply relaxed index finger across the resting curve of a single root, you would instantly feel its astonishing firmness. A heavy, incredibly dense, perfectly unyielding solidity that proudly speaks of its highly concentrated, deeply stored botanical energy. Trailing beautifully from the tapered ends of these plump, heavy bulbs are incredibly fine, wonderfully delicate, profoundly thread-like rootlets. They are completely dry and softly brittle to the gentle touch, resembling a tiny, perfectly tangled, deeply intricate web of the thinnest, most delicate spun silk. The ambient, deeply peaceful silence of the surrounding space settles completely over this small resting mound of earth-born treasures, wrapping them perfectly in an invisible, heavily comforting blanket of profound absolute stillness. Resting quietly and perfectly flush against the smooth, cooling surface of a nearby wooden block is a deeply breathtaking, incredibly sharp tool, masterfully crafted entirely from a single heavy core of dark volcanic obsidian. This ancient functional blade is not merely a piece of chipped stone, it is an absolute marvel of perfectly deliberate, heavily skilled, profoundly ancient engineering. The dark volcanic glass is completely, perfectly opaque in its thickest center, possessing a deep, totally boundless, incredibly glossy blackness that totally refuses to reflect even a single solitary beam of the ambient, fading light. However, along the perfectly napped, incredibly long, flawlessly straight cutting edge, the dense stone miraculously tapers down to an astonishing, mind-boggling thinness. At this perfectly crafted microscopic edge, the hard black glass suddenly becomes completely, beautifully translucent, glowing with a deeply faint, incredibly subtle, beautifully warm, smoky amber hue when held completely still against the heavily diffused afternoon sunlight. The exact point where the heavy, dark core completely yields to the translucent, razor-sharp edge is perfectly marked by a long, beautifully undulating, totally continuous ripple, a permanent, deeply frozen wave, perfectly capturing the exact, powerful moment of the ancient maker's totally precise, deeply calculated strike. To simply gaze deeply into the glossy, perfectly smooth surface of this heavy, resting dark blade is to feel your own deeply tired mind wonderfully smoothing out, completely absorbing the perfectly cold, beautifully unyielding, utterly flawless tranquility of the heavy sleeping stone. It waits perfectly, totally motionless, radiating an incredibly quiet, deeply profound aura of heavy, total readiness. When the entirely invisible, totally silent artisan finally, slowly introduces the perfectly sharp, dark obsidian edge to the plump, resting flesh of the heavy orchid bulb, the resulting interaction is a profoundly mesmerizing, incredibly satisfying, totally slow-motion display of perfect yielding separation. The deeply fine, perfectly translucent edge of the dark glass does not violently chop or aggressively tear. Rather, it completely smoothly, beautifully glides downward through the dense, starchy root with an astonishing, highly hypnotic lack of physical resistance. The sound of this slow, perfectly deliberate cut is an absolute masterpiece of tiny, heavily localized, deeply organic acoustic detail. It is a profoundly crisp, incredibly wet, beautifully hollow, perfectly short snap, sounding exactly like a deeply crisp, heavy, perfectly fresh apple, being slowly, gently broken completely in half by two incredibly strong, perfectly resting hands. As the incredibly sharp, dark blade smoothly passes completely through the heavy bulb, the two freshly separated, beautifully pale halves gently, slowly fall away from each other, perfectly revealing the heavily hidden, intensely moist, profoundly brilliant interior. The exposed flesh of the root is an incredibly pristine, utterly flawless, absolutely glowing shade of pure, translucent, watery white, completely resembling the heavy, deeply frozen heart of a perfectly clear resting glacier. Almost instantly, a remarkably thick, deeply viscous, completely clear liquid naturally begins to slowly, beautifully bead along the freshly cut, perfectly flat surface. This heavy, incredibly sticky botanical sap completely refuses to run or quickly drip. Instead, it slowly, patiently pools into tiny, perfect, heavily domed, beautifully sparkling droplets. These heavy drops catch the ambient, heavily diffused light, briefly glowing exactly like tiny, perfectly cut, incredibly clear diamonds resting peacefully upon a bed of totally pale, softly resting velvet. The profoundly slow, deeply methodical, perfectly repetitive process continues, beautifully transforming the heavy, totally whole bulbs into dozens of incredibly thin, perfectly uniform, beautifully translucent slices. These delicate, highly sticky, deeply pale discs are then gently, slowly gathered by an unseen hand and carefully, quietly transferred perfectly into the waiting depth of a small, heavily rounded, incredibly dark ceramic cooking pot. This beautiful, entirely handmade clay vessel sits absolutely perfectly, profoundly securely upon three heavy, deeply blackened, smooth hearthstones. Nestled intimately beneath the heavy, curving belly of the dark pot is a small, perfectly banked, incredibly quiet, totally contained fire. This is absolutely not a roaring, aggressive, wildly leaping blaze. It is a profoundly gentle, completely mature, heavily sleeping collection of intensely hot, deeply glowing, perfectly ashen hardwood embers. These quiet embers slowly, rhythmically pulse with a deeply heavy, totally mesmerizing, dark crimson glow, breathing heavily, completely silently, gently radiating a profound, perfectly even, incredibly comforting, deeply penetrating heat perfectly upward into the heavy clay base. As the incredibly fresh, highly pristine, perfectly clear water within the dark pot completely absorbs this perfectly steady, highly gentle thermal energy, it slowly, deeply begins to warmly simmer. This is a profoundly unhurried, incredibly delicate, heavily sleepy simmer, because the heavy orchid slices are so incredibly laden with deep, highly concentrated, beautifully complex, heavy starches. The warming water entirely refuses to simply boil with chaotic, rapid bubbles. Instead, the clear liquid very slowly, wonderfully thickens, perfectly and continuously increasing its heavy viscosity until it behaves exactly like a profoundly rich, completely clear, incredibly warm syrup. The incredibly slow, deeply heavy movement of this warming, heavily thickening liquid is absolutely, profoundly hypnotic to quietly observe. A totally single, beautifully large, incredibly lazy bubble will eventually form completely at the very deepest dark bottom of the clay pot. It takes a profoundly long, endlessly stretching, deeply suspended moment for this heavy single dome of trapped heat to very slowly, beautifully push its way completely through the thick, incredibly dense, heavily starchy liquid. When it finally heavily breaches the totally smooth, entirely unbroken, warmly glistening surface, it does absolutely not violently pop. Instead, the thick, clear syrup slowly, gently stretches perfectly upward, beautifully forming a heavy, trembling, incredibly delicate, perfectly transparent dome that briefly, completely catches the deep crimson reflection of the sleeping coals perfectly below. The tiny, beautiful dome holds perfectly for a profoundly long, heavily silent second, and then beautifully, incredibly softly subsides, gently folding completely back into the heavy, thick surface with a profoundly muted, incredibly deep, totally satisfying, incredibly viscous blub. This totally single, heavy, deeply rhythmic, completely isolated sound perfectly acts as a slow, incredibly steady, totally unhurried acoustic pendulum, endlessly rocking perfectly back and forth in the profoundly still, heavily warm air, softly, gently pulling your tired, entirely relaxed mind completely down into an ocean of incredibly thick, deeply comforting, entirely profound sleep. As this heavy, incredibly slow, totally rhythmic boiling beautifully continues, The thick, clear mixture begins to gently, completely release a completely mesmerizing, totally unique, incredibly soothing fragrance perfectly into the courtyard. It is a profoundly sweet, entirely heavy, deeply comforting aroma, smelling exactly like completely warm, heavily baked earth, perfectly mixed with the deeply subtle, incredibly soft, profoundly gentle sweetness of totally pale, totally hidden, night-blooming jasmine, slowly opening perfectly in the dark. This heavily fragrant, completely warm, incredibly thick, perfectly sticky air completely surrounds you, wrapping your deeply resting, beautifully still body entirely in a cocoon of totally absolute, perfectly uninterrupted, profoundly endless peace. With the brilliant earthy red achiote pigment now miraculously transformed into an impossibly fine weightless dust upon the polished surface of the dark matate, and the sticky orchid root reduced to a warm, viscous binding syrup, the unseen artisan turns their quiet attention toward the heart of their ancient craft. Resting elevated upon the fragrant woven reed platform, protected from the meandering breezes of the open courtyard, is a single magnificent sheet of freshly prepared amate paper. This particular page is not an ordinary piece of raw bark, it is a breathtaking masterpiece of meticulous, slow-motion preparation. The raw, fibrous inner bark of the wild fig tree has been soaked endlessly within the milky, alkaline ash water until every stubborn plant fiber surrendered its natural rigidity. It has been painstakingly beaten over uncounted hours with heavy, grooved wooden mallets, merging the individual, delicate threads into one unified, pale and softly textured surface. To gently run the back of your relaxed hand across the flat expanse of this waiting amate page is a profound tactile revelation. It does not feel like modern, manufactured, crisp paper. Instead, it feels remarkably soft and beautifully yielding, reminiscent of the most cherished, worn ancient textiles. The surface is heavily textured yet entirely smooth, bearing the microscopic undulating valleys and ridges left behind by the rhythmic strikes of the wooden beater. It smells faintly of the deep jungle canopy, carrying the lingering, earthy fragrance of damp wood and the subtle, smoky ghost of the ash water it was bathed in. This pale canvas rests in the cooling shadows, an empty, patient vessel waiting to receive the vibrant, enduring memories of the Maya world, settling your own mind into a matching state of quiet, receptive stillness. The edges of the paper are delightfully irregular, featuring tiny, fibrous fringes that whisper against the woven reeds whenever a stray breath of air wanders past. The pale, creamy color of the sheet acts as a soft reflector, catching the ambient light and radiating a gentle lunar glow in the darkest corner of the portico. To facilitate the final, magical act of combination, the artisan reaches for a small, exquisite mixing bowl carved from a heavily veined piece of ancient, polished rosewood. The interior of this shallow wooden vessel has been saturated with fragrant, natural beeswax, rendering it flawlessly smooth and impervious to moisture. The wood grain itself is a study in hypnotic patterns, swirling in tight, concentric circles that resemble the rings of a stone tossed into a quiet pond. With a fluid, sweeping motion, the unseen hand carefully transfers a measured portion of the fiery red achiote dust into the dark, waiting depression. Against the rich, warm tones of the heavy rosewood, the bright, glowing hue of the fine powder becomes even more breathtaking, radiating an intense warmth that feels like a captured piece of the setting tropical sun. Using a delicate spoon crafted from a single piece of iridescent, pale oyster shell, the hand then scoops a round dollop of the thick, clear orchid binder from the gently bubbling clay pot. The interior of the shell spoon flashes with muted rainbows of pink and sea green as it moves through the dim light. This heavy, transparent droplet of botanical syrup is held directly over the waiting red powder. Because the syrup is so thick and viscous, it refuses to fall quickly. It elongates gradually, stretching downward from the curved edge of the shell in a long, unbroken thread, catching the faint, diffused afternoon light like a string of liquid crystal. Finally, the long thread breaks, and the clear droplet lands softly atop the dry powder. The instant the thick liquid touches the fine dust, a fascinating, slow-motion physical reaction begins. The thirsty, porous particles of the achiote eagerly draw the moisture inward, absorbing the heavy binder and shifting their color from a flat, powdery brick red to a lustrous, deep, glossy burgundy. To complete this botanical marriage, the artisan utilizes another highly specialized tool, a small, smooth muller crafted from a flawless piece of clear rock crystal. The dense stone is cold to the touch, contrasting beautifully against the warm, heavy air of the protected courtyard. Its surface is perfectly polished, offering a slightly distorted, magnifying view of the craftsman's calloused fingertips through the transparent glass. The flat bottom of the heavy crystal is set upon the tiny, darkening mound of mixed pigment and binder. Then, with a deliberate, gentle downward pressure, a hypnotic, repetitive, circular motion begins. The sound of this tiny, meticulous grinding is magical. It is not the resonant, earth-shaking rumble of the large basalt matete, but rather a delicate, high, soft, glassy swish. It sounds exactly like a single snowflake landing upon a frozen, quiet winter lake in the dead silence of midnight. The clear crystal muller moves round and round, crushing the microscopic red particles flawlessly into the sticky binder, ensuring a smooth, unbroken suspension of rich, intense color. As this mesmerizing, precise motion continues indefinitely in the shaded air, the bright Hachiote pigment is transformed entirely into a profoundly rich, glossy ink. The friction generates a minuscule amount of heat, just enough to fully marry the natural oils of the seeds with the starchy sweetness of the root. The final smooth texture of this newly created color is astonishing. It possesses the thick, viscous, fluid consistency of warm, rich sap, yet it miraculously glows with a pure, uncorrupted botanical radiance. It is a color that commands respect, a vibrant, life-affirming crimson that will soon be applied to the waiting Amate paper to record the cycles of the moon and the lineage of kings. When the slow, unseen hand carefully lifts the heavy, clear crystal upward from the dark wooden bowl, a thick, smooth drop of the deep red ink clings to the flat, cold glass bottom. It hangs there suspended in the quiet air, catching the fading golden afternoon light and reflecting it outward as a tiny, brilliant spark of pure crimson fire. The drop slowly stretches, fighting gravity with its own sticky cohesion, before finally releasing and falling back into the wooden bowl with a soft, deeply satisfying wet plink. This tiny sound echoes faintly against the limestone walls, a subtle punctuation mark in the quiet sentence of the afternoon. The scent of the crushed earth intimately merges with the sweet floral aroma of the orchid root, forming a single complex fragrance. This rich, heavy perfume smells of damp clay, sun-warmed wood, and the subtle, intoxicating sweetness of night-blooming jasmine. It rises slowly from the small rosewood bowl, mingling with the lingering notes of the copal incense and the wet, fibrous scent of the Amate paper. This heavy, fragrant air wraps around your resting body, a cocoon of absolute uninterrupted peace. The hypnotic rhythm of the crystal muller against the wood, the glowing warmth of the red ink, and the deep, earthy aromas all weave together into a heavy, soporific blanket. Your breathing slows to match the unhurried pace of the ancient artisan, your thoughts dissolving into the swirling, glossy depths of the newly made pigment, pulling you gently and inevitably into a profound, restorative, and dreamless sleep. The invisible boundary between mid-afternoon and the encroaching evening is marked not by a clock, but by a subtle, heavy shift in the barometric pressure of the jungle. The air, already thick with the sweet humidity of the lowland tropics, becomes palpably denser. It wraps around your resting shoulders like a weighted blanket, woven from the finest, softest raw cotton. High above the sheltered courtyard, the brilliant, unbroken azure of the sky is slowly, methodically veiled by a sweeping tide of bruised indigo clouds, rolling in with languid grace from the distant eastern coast. As these heavy, moisture-laden clouds glide silently across the face of the sun, the light within the courtyard undergoes a mesmerizing, lethargic transformation. The sharp, golden beams that previously danced across the polished stucco floor simply melt away, replaced by a soft, diffused, silvery luminescence. This muted, pearlescent light washes out all remaining shadows, painting the towering limestone walls in a flat, restful tone of dove grey and pale lavender. The ambient temperature drops, just a fraction of a degree, but it is enough to send a gentle, deeply soothing shiver down your spine, a physical release of the day's accumulated heat. New aroma introduces itself on a sudden lazy breeze, the unmistakable electric scent of ozone carrying the heavy promise of distant cooling rain. It is a crisp, metallic fragrance that gracefully cuts through the lingering sweetness of the ambient air, waking the senses just enough to make the impending relaxation feel even more profound. The arrival of the rain is not a sudden disruption. It is a polite, hesitant visitor announcing its presence with the utmost delicate care. It begins high above, in the topmost branches of the towering ancient ceiba tree. You hear the approaching weather long before you see it, a solitary rhythmic tapping sound echoing from the canopy. A single heavy drop of water condensed within the cool, dark belly of the clouds falls through the still air and strikes the broad, waxy surface of a massive green leaf. The sound is incredibly round, a deep, resonant percussion that echoes softly against the courtyard's acoustic bowl. Then another drop falls, then three more in quick staccato succession. The massive tree acts as a vast living drum, catching the sparse, heavy droplets and translating their descent into a random, syncopated rhythm. You can tilt your heavy head back and watch the highest leaves tremble and dip under the sudden weight of the water, shedding the liquid down to the branches below in a cascading, meandering path. As the gentle shower slowly intensifies, the individual taps seamlessly blend into a continuous, sweeping rustle. It sounds like 1,000 silken garments brushing against one another in a vast, dark room. The water navigates the intricate architecture of the tree, sliding down the deep, vertical grooves of the grey bark, pooling in the V-shaped junctions of the ancient branches, and finally, gently releasing itself into the open space of the courtyard below. When the silver rain finally clears the protective umbrella of the leaves and makes direct contact with the open, sun-baked expanse of the polished stucco floor, the entire courtyard seems to exhale a long-held breath. The ancient limestone foundation has been silently absorbing the fierce heat of the tropical sun for hours, storing the warmth deep within its porous microscopic structure. As the cool silver rain hits the warm stone, the water instantly vaporizes, releasing a sudden invisible wave of rich petrichor. This is the deeply comforting primal scent of dry earth drinking in the sky. It is an aroma so deeply coded into human memory that your lungs involuntarily expand to draw in as much of it as possible. The smell is a complex grounding tapestry, dusty, slightly sweet, heavily mineral, and deeply reminiscent of crushed pottery and dormant moss coming vividly back to life. As the rain falls steadily now, the pale stucco floor fundamentally changes color, transforming from a chalky bone white into a rich, dark, highly reflective slate. The falling water creates a thin, shimmering film over the ground, turning the entire courtyard into a shallow, rippling mirror that reflects the bruised, moody sky above. The lingering heat radiating from the stone meets the cool rain, creating a microscopic layer of mist that hovers just an inch above the floor, a ghostly, ethereal blanket that softens the hard lines of the architecture and makes the heavy stone ground appear to float weightlessly in the twilight. From the safe, dry sanctuary of the deeply recessed portico, you watch this gentle deluge unfold with heavy, half-closed eyes above your head. The slanted roof is constructed from thousands of tightly woven, meticulously layered, dried palm fronds. As the rain begins to fall upon this thick, thatched canopy, it creates an entirely different, incredibly cozy acoustic environment. It is not the percussive slap of water on waxy leaves, nor the crisp sizzle of rain on hot stone. Instead, it is a dense, muffled, incredibly soothing acoustic drone. It is a low-frequency hum, a heavy, vibrating blanket of sound that physically presses down on your tired shoulders, urging your muscles to surrender their last remaining tension. The complex, overlapping layers of the dried palm act as a natural, highly efficient channeling system. The water hits the brittle, golden-brown surface and is immediately guided along the tiny, parallel veins of the dried leaves. It meanders down the gentle slope of the roof, merging with other tiny streams until it reaches the very edge of the eaves. Here, right at the boundary between the deep, dry shade of the portico and the wet, silvery light of the courtyard, the rainwater gathers. It forms heavy, trembling, crystalline beads at the tip of each frayed palm frond, swelling larger and larger until gravity overcomes surface tension. Continuous shimmering curtain of water begins to fall from the edge of the roof, a translucent, liquid beaded curtain that visually and acoustically seals off your resting place from the outside world. To look through this falling water is to see the courtyard gently blurred, its shapes distorted by the moving lenses of the continuous droplets. The rhythm of this liquid curtain falling onto the limestone border creates a steady, splashing murmur. It is a white noise so pure, so perfectly consistent, that it acts as a gentle eraser for the conscious waking mind. Any lingering thoughts of the future, any echoing worries of the past are simply washed away, carried off by the tiny rushing rivulets of rainwater that navigate the subtle intentional slopes of the courtyard floor, seeking the waiting carved drains. The air inside the portico, trapped safely behind this veil of falling rain, becomes remarkably cool and intensely fragrant. The smell of the dampening palm thatch, a dusty, earthy, hay-like aroma, mixes intimately with the rising petrichor and the lingering sweet traces of the glowing embers nearby. You are insulated, wrapped securely in a cocoon of warmth, dry air and soothing sound, while the gentle forces of nature cleanse the world just a few feet away. The rain does not demand your attention, it provides a steady, unchanging, reliable background hum that grants you absolute permission to let go. As the afternoon downpour maintains its hypnotic, drumming lullaby, your eyelids grow impossibly heavy, matching the weight of the water-laden clouds above. The rhythmic tapping on the thatch, the splashing at the border, and the deep, earthy scents all combine into a heavy, intoxicating draught, drawing you deeper and deeper into the quiet, sheltering, and wonderfully dry embrace of the ancient, sleepy afternoon. As the heavy, silvery rain continues its gentle, methodical drumming upon the thick palm thatch above, your relaxed gaze drifts downward, guided by the incredibly soothing, rhythmic sound of falling water. You watch as the water cascades from the frayed edges of the roof, forming a continuous shimmering curtain that beautifully distorts the view of the wet courtyard beyond. Right at the very base of this falling curtain, where the heavy droplets strike the polished stone border, there is a small, masterfully carved, highly functional detail that captures your quiet, unhurried attention. Carved flawlessly into the pale limestone foundation is a narrow, shallow groove, a tiny, elegant gutter designed with absolute precision to manage the delicate runoff. This is no ordinary trench, its interior has been smoothed and polished over decades until it gleams like a ribbon of dark, wet silk. As the rainwater strikes the stone, it does not splatter chaotically, instead it is immediately gracefully gathered by this shallow channel. The water forms a tiny, rapid river, barely an inch deep, moving with a mesmerizing, swift fluidity. It hugs the gentle curve of the carved stone, twisting and turning with the effortless grace of a transparent serpent, navigating the heavy architecture. The channel is deliberately imperfect. Tiny, intentional undulations in the stone floor create microscopic rapids where the water tumbles over itself, forming delicate, fleeting crests of white foam that vanish as quickly as they appear. The sound of this tiny, frantic rushing is deeply delightful, a high, clear, silvery burble that contrasts perfectly with the heavy, low drone of the rain on the thatched roof above. Following the swift, meandering path of this miniature waterway, your eyes trace its journey to a deeply shadowed, slightly recessed corner of the portico. Here, the narrow channel widens and seamlessly empties its gathered bounty into a large, incredibly robust and beautifully spherical ceramic jar. This ancient water vessel, an olla, is a masterpiece of utilitarian art, standing nearly waist-high and possessing a breathtakingly generous swelling curve that suggests absolute abundance. The clay from which it was formed is a deep, rich, earthy brown, heavily mottled with darker, almost black scorch marks, a silent, beautiful testament to its fiery birth within a roaring ancient kiln. The surface of the heavy jar is unglazed, yet it possesses a wonderful dull sheen, polished to a low luster by the gentle friction of damp, unhurried hands over countless generations. Because the clay is naturally porous, the cold rainwater held within slowly, constantly seeps through the thick walls, creating a fine microscopic layer of condensation on the vessel's exterior. This constant, slow evaporation acts as a totally natural, incredibly efficient cooling system, chilling the water inside to a profoundly refreshing, deeply grounding temperature. As you watch, the swift little stream from the carved channel leaps joyfully from the stone lip and plunges into the dark, welcoming mouth of the heavy jar. The water strikes the surface deep within the belly of the vessel, producing a wonderfully hollow, deeply resonant, and entirely satisfying plonk. It is a sound of absolute fulfillment, of nature perfectly contained and carefully preserved. With every passing minute, the heavy, rhythmic dripping steadily raises the level of the cold, clear water within, filling the dark, echoing space with a sense of profound, quiet accumulation. Beside this massive, sweating water jar, resting casually upon a low, beautifully woven stool of dried palm fibers, sits an object of intense, quiet contemplation. It is a long, highly polished, incredibly smooth drinking gourd. This simple, elegant vessel was not carved or shaped by human hands, but perfectly grown by the earth itself, carefully cultivated on a wandering vine specifically for this humble purpose. Once harvested, it was meticulously hollowed out, deeply cleaned, and left to dry slowly in the warm, heavy tropical sun, until its thin walls became as hard and resonant as dry wood. The outer skin of the gourd is a mesmerizing canvas of natural color, a heavily mottled, beautifully organic map of pale, creamy yellows, warm, deep tans, and intricate, delicate speckles of rich, dark chocolate brown. The slender, elongated neck of the gourd has been neatly sliced away at a perfect, sharp angle, creating a naturally formed, highly ergonomic spout. The artisan who prepared this vessel has spent countless hours patiently rubbing the outer surface with the natural, fragrant oils extracted from nearby seeds, resulting in a breathtakingly soft, profoundly warm, completely matte luster that practically begs to be gently held. When resting entirely unused upon its woven stool, the hollow gourd acts as a tiny, resonant, acoustic chamber. The ambient, low hum of the falling rain, the silvery rushing of the tiny stone channel, and the deep, hollow dripping within the large clay jar are all subtly captured by the thin, dry walls of the gourd. They reverberate gently within its hollow belly, producing a profoundly faint, incredibly soothing, totally continuous hum that you can feel more as a gentle vibration in the air than an actual sound. The air surrounding this small, quiet hydration station is noticeably different from the rest of the shaded portico because of the heavy, continuous evaporation from the porous exterior of the massive clay water jar. There is a distinct, localized microclimate here. It is significantly cooler, the air feels astonishingly crisp, and it carries an intense, pure, deeply refreshing scent. This is not the heavy, complex floral perfume of the boiling orchid root, nor the dry, dusty, earthy aroma of the crushed red pigment. Instead, it is the clean, absolutely pristine, wonderfully neutral scent of cold, deeply filtered, wet stone. It is a fragrance that instantly, forcefully clears the mind of any lingering fog, a sharp, cooling inhalation that resets the senses. Imagine standing deep within the heart of a vast, undisturbed, ancient limestone cave where the air has never been touched by sunlight, breathing in the cold, damp, profoundly silent atmosphere. That is the exact wonderful scent radiating slowly from the sweating, dark clay jar. This sudden, beautiful clarity in the air acts as a gentle, incredibly refreshing contrast to the heavy, sleep-inducing aromas that fill the rest of the courtyard, creating a perfect sensory balance that prevents the mind from slipping entirely into unconsciousness before it is truly ready to rest. It is a small, highly localized pocket of pure, chilling refreshment, entirely surrounded by a vast, heavy, comfortable sea of deep, tropical languor. In this quiet, deeply shadowed corner, the passage of time is measured not by the movement of the sun, which is now completely hidden behind the thick, weeping clouds, but entirely by the steady, unhurried accumulation of the cold water. Drop by heavy drop, the large clay jar slowly fills, its hollow, resonant voice gradually changing pitch, becoming deeper and more totally muffled as the water level silently rises. The tiny, elegant channel continues its silvery, frantic dance, tirelessly delivering its liquid cargo. The hollow gourd waits patiently on its woven stool, holding within its thin walls the promise of a cool, restorative drink. And you, resting comfortably in the deep shade, are merely a quiet, unobserved witness to this tiny, totally essential, deeply ancient ritual. There is absolutely nothing you need to do, no task waiting for your attention. You are completely free to simply watch the tiny whitecaps form in the stone channel, to listen completely to the hollow, echoing drops falling perfectly into the dark water, and to breathe in the sharp, incredibly clean scent of the cold, wet clay. The rain continues its heavy, hypnotic drumming upon the thick thatch above, entirely sealing you inside this cool, deeply peaceful sanctuary. The rhythmic, repetitive nature of these small, liquid tasks, the flowing, the falling, the filling, serves as a beautiful, totally natural lullaby, gently, slowly rocking your mind away from the demanding complexities of the modern world and completely immersing you in the heavy, simple, profound tranquility of the slow, wet Maya afternoon. Reluctantly tearing your gaze away from the hypnotic, silvery dance of the tiny water channel, you allow your eyes to drift further along the shadowed expanse of the portico. The air here, trapped securely beneath the thick, tightly woven thatch and cooled by the gentle evaporation of the nearby olla, feels dense and still. It acts as a soft, invisible buffer against the world outside. Your attention is drawn to a magnificent, low-slung table positioned deliberately in a space where the ambient light is most diffused. This expansive work surface is not constructed from rough, hewn planks, but is instead carved entirely from a single massive slab of ancient cedar. The wood is an intoxicating shade of warm, burnished cinnamon, its surface smoothed to an impossible, frictionless glide by decades of continuous, reverent use. If you were to run the soft pad of your thumb along its edge, you would feel a microscopic topography of undulating waves, perfectly tracing the tight, complex grain of the wood. The natural oils of the cedar, released by the warmth of the surrounding air, emit a soothing, dry, slightly spicy fragrance that complements the damp, earthy petrichor rising from the rain-soaked courtyard. It is a scent that encourages deep, slow breathing, pulling the tranquil atmosphere into your lungs. Resting with immense deliberate care upon this magnificent cedar surface is a captivating collection of tools arranged with the meticulous, intentional order of a silent altar dedicated to the art of writing. Central to this arrangement is a highly polished palette carved from a single, flawless piece of dark mottled jadeite. This dense, cool stone is a breathtaking canvas of deep saturated greens, ranging from a pale, cloudy mint to a dark, nearly black emerald, resembling a frozen slice of the oldest jungle canopy. Sunk flawlessly into the smooth surface of this heavy jadeite palette are 3 shallow, circular depressions. Each tiny basin is dedicated to holding a specific, refined pigment, waiting patiently to be transferred to the pristine Amate paper. The first depression holds a profound, impenetrable black ink, crafted from the finely ground calcined soot of the sacred copal resin, possessing a thick, velvety darkness that seems to absorb the light around it. The second contains a bright, vibrant Maya blue, a miraculous, highly stable compound born from the careful heating of the indigo plant, mixed with pure white palygorskite clay. This creates a shade of blue so pure and electric that it rivals the clearest, most sun-drenched sky. The third, currently empty, waits for the deep, blood-red achiote ink currently resting in the dark rosewood bowl nearby. The heavy jadeite palette is cool to the touch, its dense mass providing a grounding anchor amidst the delicate tools scattered gently around it. Arranged meticulously beside the jadeite palette is a collection of breathtakingly delicate handmade brushes, each a masterpiece of focused engineering. The long, slender handles of these brushes are carefully shaped from the strong, hollow quills of large predatory birds, eagles and hawks that once soared high above the ancient, sprawling city. The quills have been expertly stripped of their heavy feathers, meticulously cleaned and polished until their pale, naturally ribbed surfaces gleam with a soft, subtle iridescence. Bound securely to the tip of each hollow quill using fine, practically invisible threads of spun cotton, are the actual brush hairs. These delicate bristles are sourced from the soft, protected underbellies of small jungle mammals, perhaps the fine, dense fur of a resting coatimundi or the impossibly soft, pale hairs of a nocturnal kinkajo. The bristles have been repeatedly washed, meticulously sorted by exact length, and precisely shaped into tapering, fine points that can effortlessly hold a significant drop of the thick ink while flawlessly maintaining their sharp shape. When resting unused upon the smooth cedar table, the soft bristles fan out slightly, resembling tiny, delicate, pale flames frozen in mid-flicker. The sheer, delicate fragility of these tools perfectly contrasts with the unyielding mass of the jadeite palette and the dense cedar table, creating a beautiful visual tension that demands a gentle, unhurried approach. Amongst these delicate brushes rests an enigmatic, intriguing object, a small cylindrical roller carved carefully from a dense, polished piece of dark manatee bone. The bone is a rich, mottled shade of creamy ivory, streaked with faint, delicate lines of dark, earthy brown, a silent testament to its ancient aquatic origins. The smooth surface of the heavy bone cylinder has been painstakingly engraved with an intricate, complex, repeating pattern of stylized hieroglyphs and geometric undulating curves. This is an ancient vital stamp, designed to quickly transfer a specific important repeating border or a sacred motif onto the waiting amate paper. The heavy bone feels cool and dense in the hand, possessing a satisfying substantial weight that practically demands to be rolled slowly, firmly, and deliberately across a yielding surface. Resting right beside this bone roller is a tiny, shallow, carved shell, highly polished and iridescent, holding a small formed mound of fine, powdery, pale limestone dust. This fine, dry dust acts as a tiny, natural, effective pounce, specifically designed to be gently, carefully dusted over the freshly applied ink, instantly absorbing any excess moisture and ensuring that the final, profound, crisp, sharp lines do not bleed into the thirsty, yielding amate paper. This careful collection of bone, shell, feather, hair, and stone represents the quiet, focused zenith of the scribe's art, a silent orchestra of natural materials waiting to compose a visual symphony upon the blank, patient canvas of the beaten bark. When the artisan's hand finally moves toward these tools, the action is so fluid and silent it seems like a continuation of the falling rain outside. The long fingers, stained faintly at the tips with ghosts of ancient colors, hover over the array before selecting one of the slender quill brushes. The motion of lifting the delicate instrument is deliberate, devoid of any sudden jerks or hurried adjustments. As the brush is raised, the fine animal hairs catch a fleeting glint of the silvery light filtering through the rain curtain. The artisan does not immediately reach for the ink. Instead, they pause, holding the brush poised above the blank amate paper, entering a state of profound meditative stillness. This is the moment of conception, the quiet pause before the thought becomes permanent. The heavy cedar table absorbs the silence, the jadeite palette waits with its pools of liquid color, and the carved bone roller rests like a slumbering artifact. Even the steady drumming of the rain on the thatch seems to soften, respecting the sanctity of this creative hesitation. You, watching from the deep shadows, find your own breathing matching the slow, measured inhalations of the scribe. The tension in your jaw completely vanishes, your shoulders drop, and the gentle, rhythmic hum of the courtyard pulls you deeper into the ancient, sleepy rhythm of the Maya afternoon. The profound, meditative pause hovering over the vast, creamy expanse of the amate paper finally gently breaks. The artisan's hand, holding the slender quill brush with the delicate, practiced grip of a master, begins its slow descent. The movement is so fluid, so entirely devoid of hesitation or haste, that it resembles the graceful swoop of a diving swallow observed in extreme slow motion. The fine, tapered tip of the brush, composed of those impossibly soft, meticulously gathered animal hairs, makes its first, crucial contact with the waiting surface. This initial touch is not a forceful stroke, but a gentle, inquisitive caress. The artisan is not merely applying pigment, they are initiating a silent dialogue with the texture of the beaten bark. As the brush glides, You can almost hear the microscopic whisper of the hairs interacting with the subtle undulating ridges of the paper, a sound so faint it registers more as a vibration in the quiet air than an actual noise. The first mark laid down is not ink but pure water. The artisan uses the clear liquid to map out the invisible boundaries of the composition, creating a faint, glistening, temporary ghost image that will guide the permanent application of colour. This initial watery sketch is a testament to immense patience, a refusal to rush the eternal act of recording. It vanishes almost as quickly as it is drawn, absorbed greedily by the thirsty, porous nature of the amate, leaving behind only a faint, slightly darker shadow on the pale surface. Having established the invisible framework, the artisan's hand moves smoothly toward the heavy jadeite palette. The tip of the brush dips with agonizing slowness into the shallow depression holding the deep, velvety black ink derived from the calcined soot of the sacred copal. When the brush is lifted, a heavy, perfectly formed drop of the thick liquid clings stubbornly to the fine hairs. It does not drip. The viscosity of the ink and the capillary action of the brush hold it in perfect suspension. The artisan brings the loaded brush back to the paper, and this time the contact is decisive. A long, elegant, curving line of absolute darkness is laid down upon the creamy background. The contrast is breathtaking. The black ink seems to absorb all the ambient light, creating a void of pure shadow against the warm, pale texture of the bark. The line is not uniform. It varies subtly in thickness, swelling and tapering in response to the microscopic variations in the artisan's pressure. This intentional variation breathes life into the stroke, transforming a simple mark into a dynamic flowing form. It is the beginning of a hieroglyph, a complex symbol that encapsulates an entire concept, a historical event, or the name of a forgotten deity. To watch this slow, deliberate creation is to witness the very act of freezing time, of capturing a fleeting thought and anchoring it permanently to the physical world. As the intricate black outlines of the glyphs slowly populate the upper corner of the heavy page, the artisan shifts their focus to the vibrant, emotional heart of the composition. The brush is meticulously cleaned in a small, hollowed-out gourd filled with clear water, the black soot swirling and dissolving into a dark, cloudy storm within the miniature basin. Then the clean tip is dipped into the waiting pool of Maya blue. This miraculous pigment, the marriage of indigo and rare clay, possesses an electric, luminescent quality that defies description. It is the color of the tropical sky at its absolute zenith, the color of a deep, undisturbed cenote reflecting the morning sun. When applied to the amate, the blue ink does not just sit on the surface, it seems to illuminate the paper from within. The artisan uses this vibrant hue to fill the negative spaces within the black outlines, adding depth, dimension, and a profound sense of sky-bound divinity to the terrestrial symbols. The blue ink flows from the brush with a heavy, satisfying consistency, pooling slightly before being absorbed by the fibers. The slow, rhythmic application of this celestial color is incredibly soothing, a visual lullaby of bright, calming blue set against the warm, earthy tones of the bark and the wood. It is a slow, methodical layering of color, a deliberate building of visual weight that anchors the gaze and quiets the mind. Finally, the artisan reaches for the deeply saturated, heavily viscous crimson ink, born from the crushed achiote seeds and the sticky orchid root syrup. This is the color of life, of blood, of the setting sun, and it is applied with the utmost reverent care. The crimson ink is used sparingly, reserved for the most crucial details, the heart of a depicted deity, the stylized flame of a sacrificial fire, the intricate knot of a royal headdress. Because of the thick, syrupy nature of the orchid binder, the red ink does not immediately soak into the paper. It sits slightly proud of the surface, forming a tiny, glossy, raised pool of intense ruby red light. It catches the silvery, diffused glow of the rain-filtered afternoon, gleaming like a tiny wet jewel amidst the matte finish of the black and blue. The application of this heavy, sticky red ink is the slowest, most deliberate action of all. The artisan must carefully manage the heavy drop, guiding it precisely within the designated boundaries, ensuring that it remains thick and vibrant. The slow, heavy drag of the brush against the paper loaded with this thick, sticky liquid, creates a subtle, deeply satisfying friction, a tactile resistance that forces the movement to become even more measured, even more hypnotic. It is a slow-motion dance of intense color and careful control, a visual symphony of red, blue, black, and pale earth. The culmination of this deeply unhurried process involves the tiny, specialized tools resting nearby. Once the heavy, glossy crimson ink has been perfectly applied, the artisan retrieves the small, iridescent shell holding the fine, pale limestone dust. Using an impossibly small, delicate brush fashioned from a single stiff bristle, they gently, carefully tap a microscopic amount of the powdery dust directly onto the wet resting surface of the red ink. This tiny application acts as a perfect natural desiccant, instantly absorbing the excess moisture of the orchid syrup and ensuring that the intense, vibrant color will never bleed or spread into the thirsty fibers of the amate. The application of the dust is so incredibly delicate, so entirely precise that it borders on the magical. It is the final securing touch, a silent guarantee that the vibrant, glowing color will remain perfectly sharp, perfectly crisp for centuries to come. The artisan then sets the tools down with a soft final clack against the cedar table, leaning back to observe the completed section. The intricate, colorful glyphs now sit proudly upon the pale paper, a permanent, beautiful record of the slow, quiet, heavily scented Maya afternoon. The rain continues its steady, rhythmic drumming on the thatch above, the water jars slowly, patiently fill, and the deep, profound peace of the ancient courtyard wraps around you, a heavy, warm, colorful blanket of uninterrupted sleep. With the delicate, vibrant glyphs now permanently resting upon the thirsty surface of the amate paper, the artisan slowly pushes the heavy cedar table back, granting themselves a moment of profound, undisturbed rest. The physical act of creation has ceased, but the heavy, intoxicating atmosphere of the courtyard remains, thick with the complex, layered fragrances of the afternoon's labor. The scent of the earthy achiotate, the sweet, simmering orchid root, and the crisp, clean petrichor of the falling rain all intermingle, creating a heavy, aromatic tapestry that invites deep philosophical reflection. This is the hour when the mind, untethered from the immediate demands of physical action, begins to wander through the vast, quiet corridors of time. Sitting in the deep, cooling shade of the portico, you watch as the silver rain continues its hypnotic descent, blurring the lines of the massive limestone walls and softening the hard edges of the world. The realization washes over you with the gentle, irresistible force of a rising tide. The very concept of time here is fundamentally different from the frantic, ticking urgency of the modern era. In this ancient space, time is not a straight, unforgiving line rushing constantly toward a distant, anxious future. It is a slow, majestic, continuously revolving wheel. It is measured not in fleeting seconds or rigid schedules, but in the agonizingly slow unfurling of a fern frond, the patient, methodical dripping of condensation into a clay jar, and the deeply repetitive, sweeping motion of a stone grinding against stone. This cyclical nature of time is profoundly comforting, offering a silent assurance that every ending is merely the quiet prelude to a new, identical beginning. The massive, silent architecture of the courtyard serves as a profound, physical manifestation of this deep, cyclical philosophy. The towering limestone walls, quarried from the ancient earth and shaped by generations of unhurried hands, stand as stoic, enduring witnesses to the endless rotation of the seasons. They have absorbed the fierce, golden heat of 10,000 afternoons, only to willingly surrender it to the cool, silvery embrace of 10,000 evening rains. They are not merely structures built to house an activity, they are an integral, breathing part of the jungle's eternal rhythm. As you trace the incredibly intricate, undulating lines of the carved bas-relief with your heavy eyes, you understand that the artisan who coaxed those rounded shapes from the dense stone was not attempting to conquer time, but to beautifully, harmoniously participate within it. The sleeping jaguars, the heavy, stylized clouds, the curling vines, they are all permanent stone echoes of the transient living world outside, captured and held in perfect, unyielding stasis. They represent a deep, profound acceptance of the natural order, a quiet understanding that true permanence is not found in frantic, desperate action, but in the slow, deliberate, incredibly patient alignment with the slow, heavy heartbeat of the earth itself. The deep, velvety shadows that pool within the crevices of the carvings seem to hold the concentrated essence of this ancient patience, radiating a dark, cooling peace that settles heavily upon your tired mind. This profound sense of eternal patience extends to the very materials that the artisan utilizes, materials that require a deep, totally unhurried relationship with the natural world. The creation of the Amate paper is a perfect, beautiful example of this deeply slow philosophy. The wild fig tree does not simply offer up its inner bark upon request, it demands years of quiet, steady growth, drawing moisture from the deep, hidden aquifers and absorbing the heavy tropical sunlight. When the bark is finally respectfully harvested, it is not immediately rushed into production. It must undergo the incredibly slow, methodical, deeply transformative process of soaking in the heavy, milky ash water, a process that cannot be hurried or artificially accelerated without destroying the delicate integrity of the fibers. The heavy, rhythmic beating with the grooved wooden mallets is not an act of aggressive force, but a slow, deeply meditative negotiation with the raw material, coaxing it gently, patiently, over uncounted hours, into a new, beautifully unified form. To simply touch the finished, incredibly soft surface of the pale page is to feel the physical embodiment of a decade of slow, silent growth and days of entirely unhurried, patient labor. It is a material that commands absolute respect, silently demanding that whatever is recorded upon its surface must be worthy of the immense, profound time invested in its creation. The vibrant, glowing pigments, too, are a deep, philosophical lesson in the slow, inevitable nature of transformation. The brilliant red achiote seeds must first endure the fierce, drying heat of the sun, entirely surrendering their protective pods before they can release their intense, fiery color. The deep, heavy, resonant sound of the basalt metate grinding the hard seeds into a weightless, incredibly fine powder is the acoustic signature of this slow surrender. It is a beautiful, totally unavoidable destruction that leads directly to a profound, intensely beautiful creation. The deep, rich Maya blue requires the delicate indigo plant to be carefully, slowly heated, its fragile, organic structure perfectly combined with the pure, white palygorskite clay in an ancient, completely silent alchemy that permanently stabilizes the fleeting color. And the thick, sweet, deeply viscous binder coaxed from the hidden, starchy heart of the wild orchid root requires the slow, gentle, incredibly contained heat of the sleeping embers to reach its perfect, sticky consistency. Every single element, every tool, every action within this shaded courtyard is a slow, deeply deliberate step in an ancient, beautifully choreographed dance with time. It is a profound, entirely unspoken philosophy that values the slow, the patient, and the enduring over the fast, the immediate, and the ephemeral. As you sit completely relaxed within this heavy, deeply comforting atmosphere, watching the silvery rain gently wash the ancient stone and listening to the low, hypnotic murmur of the tiny water channel, the burden of your own hurried existence simply dissolves. The frantic need to produce, to achieve, to constantly move forward is entirely replaced by a profound, heavy, deeply settling acceptance of the present moment. The slow, heavy, incredibly steady rhythm of the courtyard, the drip of the water, the rustle of the heavy cotton textiles, the soft sizzle of the melting copal resin becomes your own internal metronome. You realize that you do not need to fight against the passage of time. You can simply allow it to carry you, slowly and gently, exactly like a drifting leaf upon a deeply quiet, unhurried stream. The heavy, protective walls of the portico hold the loud, demanding world firmly at bay, preserving this tiny, perfect pocket of ancient, slow-motion peace just for you. The vibrant colors of the freshly applied ink, the intoxicating heavy aromas, and the deeply tactile nature of the ancient tools all combine to create a deeply immersive, totally sensory lullaby. It is an incredibly soft, heavy, perfectly repetitive invitation to completely let go, to surrender your weary mind to the profound, eternal stillness of the Maya afternoon, and to drift, entirely untethered, into a deep, incredibly restorative and wonderfully dreamless sleep. As the gentle silvery rain gradually intensifies, transforming from a subtle drizzle into a steady rhythmic downpour. Its cadence upon the thick woven palm thatch above shifts into a deeper, more resonant drumming. This continuous hypnotic sound acts as a natural, enveloping metronome, dictating a profoundly slow, entirely unhurried pace for the fading afternoon. The light within the courtyard begins to undergo a profound, almost imperceptible shift. The silvery, diffused illumination that characterized the early hours of the storm is slowly, gracefully giving way to the deeper, bruised hues of approaching twilight. The shadows, previously held back by the soft luminescence of the rain, now stretch and elongate with a lethargic, creeping certainty, emerging from the deep recesses of the carved limestone walls and the thick, dense foliage of the protective cedar canopy. This is the liminal hour, a quiet, perfectly balanced space caught seamlessly between the productive energy of the day and the restorative silence of the night. It is a time of inevitable surrender, a gentle settling of the dust that has been dancing so vividly in the fading light. As you sit perfectly still within the cooling, shaded sanctuary of the wooden portico, you can physically feel this transition happening around you. The air itself seems to grow heavier, thicker, taking on a rich, velvety quality that rests comfortably against your skin. The realization settles over your resting mind that this slow, unhurried fading of the light is not an end, but rather a beautiful, necessary prelude to total rest. It is a daily, reliable cycle that has occurred in this exact courtyard for centuries, a natural, comforting rhythm that asks for nothing but your quiet, passive observation. This creeping twilight fundamentally alters the visual texture of the magnificent tools resting upon the ancient cedar table. The vibrant, glowing intensity of the freshly mixed crimson ink, which earlier seemed to radiate its own fiery warmth, now begins to slowly deepen, taking on the rich, complex, intoxicating hue of heavily aged dark wine. The smooth, polished surface of the deep jadeite palette, which held the brilliant electric Maya blue, now absorbs the encroaching shadows, its deep mottled greens becoming profoundly dark, almost black, exactly like the deepest, most hidden pool of a sacred, untouched cenote at midnight. The delicate, pale animal hairs of the resting quill brushes, which previously caught the silvery light with a soft iridescent flicker, now blend seamlessly into the cooling darkness, their fragile forms becoming soft, indistinct silhouettes against the heavy wood. Even the massive, unyielding form of the dark basalt matete, which dominated the workspace with its grounding presence, seems to slowly retreat into the background, its deep, polished valley holding pools of soft, velvety shadow instead of the bright, fiery dust of the achiote seeds. This slow, visual, unifying process of darkening acts as a soothing lullaby, gently dimming the lights of your own internal awareness, slowly preparing your tired mind for the absolute, uninterrupted darkness of a perfect sleep. The shifting light also radically transforms the intricate, masterfully executed bas-relief carvings on the massive limestone wall, the soft, undulating biological curves of the sleeping jaguars and the stylized clouds, which were previously defined by a complex landscape of tiny, illuminated highlights and profound microshadows, now undergo a subtle metamorphosis. The dying light catches only the very highest, most polished ridges of the ancient stone, creating faint, continuous, delicate lines of pale grey that seem to float entirely free from the massive background. The deep, velvety crevices, the carved valleys of the stone become voids of pure darkness, intensely exaggerating the incredible depth and immense, silent weight of the artwork. As the twilight deepens, these faint, floating lines begin to visually blur and softly merge, losing their distinct, sharp edges. The sleeping jaguars seem to slowly dissolve into the heavily textured background. The rolling clouds become indistinguishable from the shadowed, worn stone. It is as if the ancient, silent story carved into the wall is slowly, gently closing its own heavy eyes, peacefully surrendering to the inevitable, comforting embrace of the approaching night. Watching this slow, silent dissolution of form is profoundly hypnotic. It effortlessly encourages your own heavy thoughts to lose their sharp, distinct edges, to slowly merge and dissolve into the vast, empty, comforting quiet of your resting mind. Accompanying this beautiful slow visual fade is a subtle, profound shift in the complex aromatic tapestry of the courtyard. The crisp, clean, refreshing scent of the petrichor, which rose so vividly when the first silver raindrops hit the warm stucco floor, is now gracefully giving way to the deeper, richer, heavy fragrances of the damp, cooling earth. The smell of the wet, porous limestone architecture becomes more pronounced, an ancient, mineral scent that speaks of centuries of slow, silent water absorption. The organic aroma of the raw, pale amate bark resting quietly upon its woven reed platform deepens significantly, releasing a rich, damp, grounding scent that smells exactly like the deep, untouched, shaded heart of the wild jungle floor. The sweet, complex, subtle fragrance of the simmering orchid root, which previously mingled with the sharp, clean ozone of the rain, now becomes a soft, comforting background note, a beautiful organic sweetness that lingers in the perfectly still air. And weaving seamlessly through all of these deep, heavy, cooling scents is the faint, slow, lingering ghost of the copal incense. The glowing ruby-red ember has long since faded into a soft, cool mound of pale grey ash, but the rich, resinous, heavy smoke has settled permanently into the thick thatch of the roof and the indigo textiles, creating an intoxicating perfume that deeply anchors the entire space in absolute, timeless tranquility. This slow, beautiful, silent transition from day to night is not something to be actively watched, but rather something to be completely, passively absorbed. It is a heavy, gentle, inevitable process that requires absolutely zero effort, zero resistance, and zero thought. You are perfectly safe within the deep, protected, cool shadows of the wooden portico, entirely insulated from the chaotic, rushing world by the towering limestone walls and the steady, hypnotic rhythm of the falling rain. The slow, beautiful darkening of the vibrant colors, the gentle, peaceful blurring of the carved stone, and the heavy grounding shift in the ancient, complex aromas all combine to create a powerful, irresistible sensory invitation. It is a perfect, flawless, silent invitation to close your heavy, tired eyes, to let go of any remaining tension, and to drift entirely untethered into a deep, restorative, and wonderfully dreamless sleep. As the twilight thickens into a profound, enveloping dusk, the rain begins a slow, methodical retreat. The heavy, continuous drumming upon the palm thatch gradually softens, transforming back into individual scattered taps before finally ceasing altogether. The cessation of the rain does not bring a sudden, jarring silence. Instead, it reveals the intricate, microscopic soundscape of the wet courtyard, previously masked by the downpour. You can hear the final lingering drops falling from the highest branches of the ceiba tree, striking the slick, broad leaves with a resonant, hollow thok. The tiny, carved limestone channel continues its frantic, silvery rushing for a few moments longer, the remaining runoff tumbling into the dark, echoing belly of the massive clayola with a deeply satisfying, rhythmic plonk. As the water slowly drains away, the tiny channel eventually runs dry, leaving only a faint, glistening trail on the polished stone. The sudden absence of the rushing water makes the thick, humid air feel even heavier, even more profoundly still. It is a quiet that possesses an almost physical weight, a dense, comforting blanket that presses gently against your resting body, signaling the absolute conclusion of the day's gentle labors. With the rain gone, the heavy, moisture-laden clouds above begin to fracture and pull apart, revealing tantalizing glimpses of the deep, darkening night sky. Single solitary star, impossibly bright and fiercely pale, pierces through a break in the cloud cover, casting a faint, silvery, almost microscopic beam of light down into the shadowed courtyard. This solitary pinprick of illumination acts as a tiny celestial spotlight, highlighting the smooth, polished surface of the dark jadeite palette or catching the edge of a delicate quill brush. The appearance of the first star is a profoundly significant event in this ancient space. It is a silent, cosmic confirmation that the slow turning wheel of time has successfully completed another revolution, that the day has safely yielded to the night. To sit in the deep, cooling shade and watch the sky slowly, piece by piece, reveal its glittering ancient map is to feel completely unmoored from the rigid constraints of your own era. You are not a visitor from the future, you are simply a resting observer, completely integrated into the timeless, cyclical rhythm of the Maya universe. The vastness of the sky above, scattered with the cold, distant light of a billion stars, does not invoke a sense of insignificance, but rather a profound, deeply comforting feeling of connection to a narrative far older and far slower than your own. The physical sensation of the air within the portico undergoes its final, most soothing transformation. The heat of the day, which was absorbed by the heavy limestone walls and the thick stucco floor, has now been completely exhausted, released back into the cooling atmosphere. The temperature stabilizes at a perfect, profoundly comfortable equilibrium. It is neither warm nor cool, it is simply the precise neutral temperature of total rest. You no longer feel the boundaries where your skin ends and the air begins. This perfect thermal balance eliminates the last lingering need for physical adjustment. You do not need to pull a blanket tighter or seek out a cooler breeze. Your body is entirely supported, perfectly cradled by the heavy, still air and the solid, unyielding strength of the polished stone floor beneath you. The complete absence of physical discomfort allows your mind to entirely detach from its sensory moorings, to float freely within the quiet, dark space behind your closed eyelids. The heavy, intoxicating aromas of the courtyard, the wet earth, the sweet orchid root, the lingering copal smoke, have settled into a single unified fragrance, a subtle, earthy perfume that smells exactly like the concept of history itself. Every inhalation draws this ancient, settling essence deeper into your lungs. Every exhalation releases the final, stubborn fragments of your waking tension. In this state of total, profound relaxation, the concept of sleep changes. It is no longer an action to be pursued or a state to be achieved. It is simply an inevitable, gravity-like force pulling you downward. The deep, heavy shadows of the portico seem to physically extend, reaching out to gently close over your resting form. The ancient heavy tools resting on the cedar table, the dark basalt matete, the delicate brushes, the polished jadeite palette, are all completely still, mirroring your own profound physical inertia. They have completed their slow, methodical tasks, and they now rest with the profound satisfaction of purpose fulfilled. You too have completed the task of witnessing this slow, beautiful afternoon. There is nothing left to observe, nothing left to analyze, nothing left to process. The intricate, colorful glyphs on the Amate paper are finished, a permanent record of the day's quiet passage. The fire beneath the clay pot has died down entirely, leaving only a soft, cooling mound of pale grey ash. The tiny, elegant water channel is silent, its purpose served. The courtyard has seamlessly, beautifully transitioned from a space of slow, deliberate creation to a sanctuary of absolute, uninterrupted rest. As you yield entirely to this overwhelming, gentle gravity, the boundaries of the physical world begin to softly blur and dissolve. The massive limestone walls, the sprawling ceiba tree, the heavy cedar table, they all lose their solid edges, melting away into the vast, comfortable darkness. Only the very core sensations remain, the steady, rhythmic beat of your own slow heart, the gentle, effortless rise and fall of your chest, and the faint, lingering, earthy scent of the ancient Maya world. You are suspended in a state of pure, weightless tranquility, entirely safe, entirely protected, and entirely at peace. The slow, heavy rhythm of the afternoon has become the rhythm of your own sleep, a deep, restorative, and perfectly dreamless slumber that will carry you safely through the long, quiet hours of the night. This is the true gift of the ancient courtyard, the absolute permission to stop, to rest, and to simply be, held securely within the unhurried, eternal embrace of history. As the indigo canopy of the night sky claims the space above the courtyard, a new symphony begins to rise from the dense foliage beyond the perimeter. This is not the chaotic clamour of the daylight hours, but the rhythmic, synchronized hum of the nocturnal world awakening. Millions of unseen tree frogs and crickets initiate a low, vibrating chorus that pulses through the humid air with the steady, reliable cadence of a deep, collective heartbeat. The sound is naturally muffled, heavily filtered by the immense thickness of the surrounding flora and the towering architectural barriers. By the time these acoustic waves spill over the rounded upper edges of the courtyard walls, They have been softened into a continuous, soothing thrum. It is a drone so consistent and harmonic that it ceases to be a distinct noise, becoming instead a physical sensation, a gentle acoustic massage that resonates within the hollow spaces of the portico. You can almost feel the vibration in the heavy cedar wood of the table and the porous surface of the stucco floor. This nocturnal lullaby weaves seamlessly with the steady, slow rhythm of your own breathing, anchoring your consciousness in the profound peace of the present moment. If you listen closely, beneath the unified thrum you can distinguish the delicate, individual notes of this ancient orchestra. There is the hollow wooden talk of a large beetle navigating the rough bark of a mahogany tree far away, and the soft, sweeping rustle of a nightbird's wing as it glides silently through the upper canopy in search of a resting branch. These isolated sounds do not disrupt the tranquility. They emphasize the vast, sheltering scale of the wilderness that surrounds your intimate sanctuary. Within the sheltered darkness of the portico, an invisible, microscopic transformation is taking place upon the woven reed platform. The Amate paper bearing the fresh, vibrant glyphs lies undisturbed in the still air. Though the eyes cannot see it, the mind can picture the slow, delicate alchemy of the ink drying. The water, drawn from the deep cenote and mixed with the heavy orchid syrup, begins its slow evaporation into the cooling night. As the moisture leaves, the crushed particles of achiotite, the calcined soot, and the vivid Maya blue settle permanently into the microscopic valleys of the beaten bark. The pigment and the paper, once separate entities born from different corners of the forest, are now inextricably bound together. The fibers of the wild fig tree embrace the dust of the seeds and the earth, creating a permanent record of human thought. This quiet, unseen drying process is the exact moment when fleeting intention solidifies into enduring history. It happens without fanfare, without a single sound, in the deep, comforting obscurity of the night. You can imagine the wet, glossy sheen of the crimson ink slowly giving way to a rich, matte finish, the surface texture of the paint matching the subtle, undulating ridges of the paper itself. The heavy, syrupy binder hardens, locking the colour away from the erosive forces of time. This silent marriage of materials is a profound lesson in patience. The artisan does not need to watch the ink dry. They trust implicitly in the natural laws of the world, knowing that the air and the earth will complete the work they began. In this exact same way, you do not need to force yourself to fall asleep. You simply need to lay down the tools of your waking day, rest your mind upon the soft surface of the night, and trust that the slow, invisible forces of fatigue and relaxation will gently carry you across the threshold. The paper accepts the ink without resistance, just as your heavy limbs now accept the pulling gravity of the earth. Somewhere nearby, hidden within the sprawling complex of the ancient city, the master artisan who orchestrated this beautiful afternoon is also resting. Though unseen, their presence is felt in the lingering warmth of the tools and the order of the workspace. They lie upon a simple woven mat, much like the one holding the paper, their breathing slow and deep, mirroring your own. The subtle ache in their hands from gripping the obsidian blade, the heavy fatigue in their shoulders from turning the crystal muller, these physical sensations are slowly melting away, dissolving into the cool night air. The artisan and you, though separated by vast oceans of time and geography, are intimately united in this universal experience of surrender. Sleep is the great equalizer, the shared sanctuary where the burdens of the conscious mind are laid to rest. As the artisan dreams of sprawling vines and carved deities, your own mind begins to unspool, drifting into a landscape of soft, indistinct shapes and comforting shadows. You can almost sense the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of their chest, a quiet metronome that aligns perfectly with the pulsing hum of the jungle outside. The physical memory of their deliberate, unhurried movements, the sweeping push of the metate, the delicate stroke of the quill brush now translates into a profound neurological calm. The kinetic energy expended during the daylight hours has been gracefully converted into the static, heavy peace of the night. There is no anxiety about the dawn, no preemptive worry about the tasks awaiting them in the light. There is only the absolute, undeniable reality of the present moment, a moment dedicated entirely to the restoration of the body and the quiet blanking of the mind. By tuning your own awareness to this imagined shared rest, You borrow from the artisans' ancient, grounded wisdom. You allow the historical distance between you to collapse, bridging the centuries through the simple shared act of closing your eyes and exhaling the day. The deep shadows that pool within the courtyard are not empty voids. They are rich, heavy vessels holding the preserved essence of time. The towering limestone walls, now invisible in the gloom, still offer their immense protective embrace. You can feel their solid mass surrounding you, a fortress of quiet that stands defiant against the chaos of the outer world. The intricately carved figures on the bas-relief, the looping serpents, the heavy-lidded deities, the sprawling flora, are now submerged in the dark, resting their stone eyes. They have witnessed countless nights just like this one, endless cycles of stars wheeling across the narrow patch of visible sky. Their enduring presence offers a profound sense of perspective. The worries that may have troubled your mind earlier in the day seem incredibly small, delightfully insignificant when placed against the backdrop of this ancient silent eternity. The heavy, polished stucco floor beneath you acts as a massive grounding anchor. It pulls the residual tension from your muscles, drawing the nervous energy down through your spine and releasing it into the bedrock of the earth. You feel yourself sinking millimeter by microscopic millimeter into the support beneath you, as if the solid stone were as soft and yielding as a bed of fresh green moss. The subtle, lingering fragrance of the copal ash, a scent that speaks of prayers whispered into the smoke, hangs motionless in the air, creating a sacred, reverent atmosphere that honors your need for rest. Every element of this forgotten courtyard is working in harmonious unison to orchestrate your descent into slumber. They are singing a silent, heavy lullaby, a song composed of texture, temperature, and aroma designed to bypass the logical mind and soothe the primal, weary soul. The slow, majestic rotation of the earth continues, carrying the courtyard and you along with it, drifting smoothly through the vast, quiet ocean of the night. The night has now fully matured, and the courtyard has become a deep well of absolute velvet tranquility. The final lingering remnants of the day's work, the vibrant red pigments, the pale sheets of armate, the heavy basalt tools, have all surrendered their distinct identities to the all-encompassing, restorative darkness. In this profound stillness, your consciousness begins to drift, no longer anchored to the specific details of the limestone walls or the carved cedar table. You are floating in a sea of soft, rhythmic sensations that repeat with a gentle, hypnotic regularity. The sound of the jungle beyond the walls has settled into a single, low-frequency hum, a sound so constant and unchanging that it feels like the very vibration of the earth itself. It is a heavy, resonant sound that pulses in time with your own slow heartbeat. Every breath you take is a long, effortless draw of the cool, oxygen-rich night air, which now carries the scent of damp earth and the distant, cooling ghost of the evening rain. You inhale the peace of the ancient forest, and as you exhale, you release the last microscopic traces of your identity. You are becoming a part of the courtyard, as still as the polished stone, as patient as the resting bark, and as fluid as the water in the dark clay jar. The weight of your body has completely vanished. You feel as light as a single dust mote suspended in the heavy air, drifting aimlessly and peacefully through the dark, silent corridors of history. As you drift, your mind begins to repeat a series of slow, soothing images like the turning of a heavy, ancient wheel. You see the single perfect drop of water gathering on the tip of a broad, waxy ceiba leaf, swelling with agonizing slowness until it plummets into the dark basalt pool plink. The sound is soft and clear, followed by the slow, concentric ripples that wash over the reflected stars. You see the heavy wooden mallet rising and falling in slow motion, the grooved surface meeting the pale fibers of the fig bark with a muffled rhythmic thud, 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 thud. It is the sound of time being woven into a physical form, a steady, unhurried cadence that rocks your mind into a deeper state of surrender. You see the deep swirling pools of Maya blue ink on the jadeite palette, a color so calm and profound that it feels like looking into the very center of a dream. You see the tiny glowing ember of the ironwood, pulsing with a slow ruby-red light beneath the protective blanket of pale grey ash. These images rotate before your closed eyes with a languid, mesmerizing grace, each one a visual lullaby that pulls you further away from the waking world. The repetition is not boring, it is deeply comforting, a reliable, unchanging cycle that provides a safe path into the unknown depths of sleep. You follow the curve of a carved stone serpent, tracing its undulating body as it winds through the shadows of the portico, leading you deeper into the quiet, dark heart of the ancient Maya night. The sensation of the heavy, cool air against your skin is like the touch of a soft, invisible hand, smoothing away any remaining thoughts. The courtyard is a fortress of silence, a sacred space where the loud, frantic concerns of the future cannot enter. Here, in the year 750, there are no clocks, no deadlines, and no digital echoes. There is only the slow, majestic movement of the celestial bodies across the sky and the steady, patient rhythm of the natural world. You are tucked away in a corner of eternity, protected by the massive limestone blocks and the thick, protective thatch of the roof. The solid ground beneath you is a connection to the very center of the earth, a grounding force that ensures your absolute safety as you prepare to let go. The atmosphere is thick with the scent of ancient wood and damp stone, a fragrance that acts as a powerful organic sedative. With every slow inhalation, you draw in the essence of this timeless sanctuary. With every slow exhalation, you sink deeper into the yielding support of the night. Your limbs are heavy, as if they were made of the same dense basalt as the metatate, pinned to the earth by a gentle, irresistible gravity. The boundary between your mind and the surrounding silence is beginning to dissolve, the quiet of the courtyard flowing into you and your own inner stillness flowing out to meet the ancient stones. You are now standing at the very edge of sleep, a threshold marked by a soft, glowing mist that blurs the final edges of your awareness. The world of the Maya courtyard is still there, but it is becoming a distant, beautiful dream. The rhythmic thrum of the crickets, the soft drip of the rain from the eaves, and the faint, sweet aroma of the copal resin are the final threads connecting you to the physical world. These threads are growing thinner and softer with every passing second. You feel a profound sense of gratitude for this slow afternoon, for the patient artisans, and for the enduring beauty of the materials that have guided you to this place of rest. The heavy, dark water in the soaking vats, the smooth grain of the cedar table, and the vibrant sleeping inks have all played their part in your journey. They now bid you a silent, peaceful farewell as you prepare to cross the final boundary. There is no effort required, no final step to take. You simply need to remain still, to breathe deeply, and to allow the heavy, warm current of sleep to lift you up and carry you away. The ancient night is vast and welcoming, a deep, dark ocean of restorative peace. You are ready to submerge yourself in its quiet depths, to leave the courtyard behind and enter the profound, dreamless sanctuary that awaits you. Rest now in the heavy, silent embrace of the past. The stars are watching, the stones are waiting, and the slow, beautiful Maya afternoon has finally, perfectly come to its quiet, resting end. The profound journey through the sun-drenched courtyard and the indigo-shaded portico has reached its final, most quiet destination. Here, in the absolute center of the ancient night, the distinction between the physical stone and your own resting form has completely, beautifully vanished. You are no longer an observer of the Maya world. You have become an integral part of its enduring, silent stasis. The heavy, polished stucco floor, the towering limestone walls, and the deep, aromatic cedar table are all held in a state of perfect, crystalline suspension. The air is so still that even the microscopic dust motes have finally found their resting places, settling invisibly upon the surfaces of the ancient tools. This is the ultimate expression of the courtyard's purpose. A sanctuary where time does not just slow down, but eventually gracefully ceases to exist. You are cradled in a void of pure, restorative darkness, a space where the weight of history serves as a protective barrier against any disturbance. The deep, resonant thrum of the nocturnal jungle has faded into a distant, monochromatic hum, a sound that is indistinguishable from the quiet, rhythmic pulsing of the blood in your ears. You are sinking, drifting, and dissolving into the heavy, comforting density of the ancient earth, pulled downward by a gravity that is as soft as silk and as unyielding as basalt. As the final moments of conscious awareness begin to flicker and fade, A series of soft, repeating sensory echoes wash over you, like the final fading ripples on the dark water jar. You feel the ghost of a cooling breeze brushing against your cheek, carrying the faint, sweet scent of damp bark and old resin. You hear the phantom plink of a solitary water drop striking the basalt pool, a sound that now exists only within the quiet chambers of your mind. You see the lingering after-image of the Maya blue ink, a soft, celestial glow that illuminates the darkness behind your closed eyelids. These echoes are not interruptions, they are the gentle, rhythmic rocking of a cradle, a final, loving assurance that the peace you found in the afternoon will remain with you throughout the night. The artisan's work is done, the paper is dry, the colours are set, the story of the day has been safely recorded in the fibres of the Amate, and now it is time for the book of the world to be gently closed. There is no more light to follow, no more sounds to interpret, no more textures to explore. There is only the vast, empty, and infinitely welcoming expanse of a deep, dreamless sleep, waiting to receive you like the cool, dark waters of a sacred cenote. In this profound state of surrender, you realize that the ancient Maya courtyard is not just a place in the past, but a permanent state of being that you can return to whenever the world becomes too loud. The stones, the wood, the water, and the ink are all still there, resting in their eternal, sun-baked silence, waiting patiently for your next visit. They offer a timeless wisdom that there is beauty in the slow, strength in the patient, and profound healing in the quiet. But for now, even that realization begins to drift away, becoming too heavy to hold. Your mind becomes as blank and peaceful as the Amate paper before the first stroke of the brush. Every muscle in your body has completely uncoiled, every nerve has settled into a state of total, blissful inertia. You are floating in a warm, dark, and perfectly safe current, a river of sleep that flows from the heart of the ancient jungle into the infinite reaches of the night. The heavy protective walls of the courtyard have expanded to encompass your entire universe, sealing you away in a cocoon of absolute, unshakable tranquility. The last remaining thread of thought, the tiny, flickering spark of your own self-awareness, now prepares to take its own final, graceful bow. It watches as the silhouette of the great ceiba tree merges with the blackness of the sky, and it listens as the final, microscopic rustle of the palm thatch fades into nothingness. There is a profound, overwhelming sense of completion, a deep, satisfied sigh that echoes through your entire being. You have travelled far, you have seen the beauty of the old world, and you have earned this total, restorative rest. The gravity of the earth pulls you deeper, the silence of the stones wraps you tighter, the scent of the ancient forest lulls you further. The boundaries have all dissolved. There is no more you, and there is no more courtyard. There is only the deep, dark, and wonderfully heavy sleep of the ages. You are drifting, you are sinking, you are resting in the perfect, eternal, and deeply beautiful quiet of the Maya night. Every breath is a surrender. Every heartbeat is a step further into the dark sleep, now held securely by the past as the world continues its slow, majestic turn. Sleep, sleep, sleep. Welcome to Sleepy History with Wesley, your personal sanctuary of ancient tales. Here, we blend authentic historical events with gentle AI technology to recreate immersive, soothing journeys through time. This channel is crafted specifically for relaxation and sleep support. TAND is not a substitute for professional medical advice. For your safety, please do not listen while driving or operating machinery. Now, close your eyes and let history carry you into a peaceful sleep.